right now.
Is this okay? This pin?
Yes. Perfect. So, hello everyone. We are live, hopefully without any technical difficulties this time, but you never know. That's just part of it. As usual, you guys are the producers of this show, so if the audio is weird, do let us know. Everything looks to be good on our end, or on my end here, but yeah, you guys let us know. I am, of course, joined by a number of folks from the community, a number of folks on our team, but most importantly, Dr. Sean Olive, who, for those who might not be aware, is the man in the mind behind the famous Harman research. There was recently a new talk at CanJam, but we should just first acknowledge that without Dr. Olive's research, many of us, the community as a whole, would sort of be grasping in the dark for, what a reference is and what good is. So I want to first thank Dr. Olive for joining us on the stream, but also for all the amazing work that he's done over the years, improving audio as we know it. So with that out of the way, I think we have a whole bunch of questions. I should probably first set the stage that this stream falls on the heels of the recent talk at CanJam, where basically it was about bringing the Harman target and some of the Harman research to the new BNK 5128 standard. And unfortunately at the talk at CanJam, we were sort of cut short at the end and weren't able to ask the questions that we probably wanted to ask. So I'm hopeful that we can do some of that in this stream, and then maybe we can also take some questions from the chat at the end of that. Does that work for everyone?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing some nodding. Okay, great. So as far as what our questions are, we have a bunch of them. Maybe we should start with the over-ear stuff first. Does that work for you guys?
I mean, it works for me. The question is if it works for Sean, because
Yeah.
his whole presentation was about in-ears.
Yeah, that's true. The focus was on in-ears, but I'm sure I can answer some questions about over-ears as well.
I think you said that because the in-ear target was the most controversial, you devoted a lot of time to it. So what we've learned from that is that we need to create more controversy so that we can get research in the areas we're interested in.
Yeah, that usually works.
Yeah.
So is there something you're thinking of in particular, Andrew?
Well, particularly on my mind was, so we noticed that you'd use the diffuse field head-related transfer function of the BNK 5128.
Calculated by Constantine.
Yes, because so use that as the baseline for the 2024 sort of beta for over-ear. And particularly because it matches reasonably closely, or it's nearly identical to what you found with 19 speakers. And my question there is, what do you think about the idea of using the diffuse field head-related transfer function as a baseline for different rigs moving forward in comparison to, or basically the idea is, do you think this is suitable for compatibility across different rigs?
Yeah, I mean, when we went back into our listening room like we did back in 2013, and we measured speakers with the BNK 5128. We also did it with KEMAR and some other heads that have developed out of our research into measuring people's HRTFs and scanning their heads. So we have the data for the KEMAR. It doesn't depart too much from the 5128. The differences are mostly above 3 kilohertz. So there is so we have that data, and we can compare it to the 5128. And it, like the 5128, it doesn't deviate too much from what we actually measured from the speakers is close to the diffuse field response. So it seems reasonable to base a target curve for the KEMAR, based on its diffuse field response.
Right, and that's sort of what Blaine has been. Is the assumption that Blaine has been running with for quite some time. I don't know, Blaine, if you want to.
the assumption is a quote from Dr. Olive in his paper in 2013, Listener Preferences for In-Room Loudspeaker and Headphone Target Responses. You had a sort of a throwaway comment that the in-room flat response was close enough to the diffuse field to be considered a substitute for preference research, which of course is true. But that line got me to start comparing a lot of mixed sound field responses to diffuse field and realizing that, particularly when they're heavily smoothed, they really are very similar, which in turn led me back around to the nice thing about diffuse field is that we can standardize it and that we can get a very high resolution diffuse field since we can use free field measurements to synthesize it, whereas it's hard to do a high resolution in-room measurement without having constructive and destructive interference produce. Well, I mean, you've seen it in your own work. Constructive and destructive interference produces wiggles.
And just to back up for the folks who are unaware, we're not talking about like diffuse field as a target curve, as Dr. Olive has shown that it's very much not preferred except for one person on this call potentially. But you know, that would be basically the equivalent of using Harman in-room as the preferred response, which it's not. It would not be.
Right. Yeah, you have to modify the diffuse field response so that it has more bass and less treble. And you know, I should point out that the in-room curve that the measurements were based on was with the loudspeaker equalized to be flat, steady state at the listening position. And of course, you would never do that to a loudspeaker. You would, you would throw it in the room. It would be flat anechoically, and you would see this gradual, sound power response where it descends from the bass to the treble. So that's why you have to turn down the treble and turn up the bass to better match the speaker before it's equalized to flat in room.
I have a question about that, actually. This is entirely unrelated to headphones, but just because Hyperion has got my brain buzzing. Have you guys thought about using it to do some research on preferences for different sound radiation patterns with the same sound power? Because you could normalize there because you have a whole bunch of different speaker incidences, right? And synthesize, for example, a downward sloping omnidirectional speaker that's omnidirectional at all frequencies.
Yeah, well, no, we haven't thought about that. Our focus has mostly been on spatial audio, but it certainly has a lot of other applications, and that's one of them. There's similar research going on over in Europe. Bang & Olufsen has this special room where they have an array of speakers, and you can go in there and play back recordings made with sound field. I don't know if they use a high order ambisonics mic, but something similar where they can capture speakers in different rooms. They can capture different sound fields to do ANC research, like different environments, like a plane, whatever. And that allows you to instantaneously switch between a speaker in different rooms, or it could be a speaker with different directivities. So it's a very controlled way to do comparisons between sound fields and speakers that you otherwise couldn't do, in real time, because unless you had a Star Trek, what do they call those things? Transporters, where you could transport someone from room to room. But this is the next best thing.
I wonder if we would see similar clusters in the directivity of speakers that would be preferred as we see in headphones, where some people who might like something that's a little brighter would prefer a wider dispersion pattern, or some people who like something that's a little bit more bassy would prefer a narrower dispersion pattern, because that, assuming the speakers are all flat on axis, that would sort of be the equivalent adjustment that would create those in-room effects.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been a little research done where they looked into people's preferences for directivity, and even if you read some of Floyd Toole's papers back in the 80s, there was some, or he may have been quoting some other people's papers, but they looked at directivity of speakers. I remember that they found recording engineers like very directional speakers when they're mixing, but when they go home, they prefer less directional, more dispersive speakers when they're relaxing. So even depending on the context and what you're trying to do, if you're doing critical listening or just relaxing, you may have a different preference. You know, Bang & Olufsen has this speaker called the BioLab. What is it called? The BioLab
90.
90. It's very, yeah, I think it cost $90,000, or it was, or it was developed for their 90th anniversary. I can't remember, but they're close. The price and the history is close, and it has the ability to switch between omnidirectional, sort of normal, and then, you know, hemispherical radiation. And apparently most people don't like the omnidirectional, but they like something in between. And we made a speaker very briefly with Soul. It was called a Lexicon. I can't remember the name now, but it had the ability to switch directivity patterns and maintain relatively constant on-axis response. So to me, that was always a speaker that you could do this, you know, very interesting research, but, you know, we never did it. I think also with immersive audio, and now that we can sort of control the amount of direct or reflected sound through, you know, an Atmos or an immersive audio system, I think directivity has become kind of a moot topic. It's really only if you're listening to 2-channel audio where you really notice or might benefit from this narrow directivity to wide dispersion.
Which, of course, for audiophiles is the majority of our audience.
Yeah.
Getting back to headphones as well, I had a question about, well, we all sort of noticed this in your talk, that the filters that you used did not, for the over-ear beta, let's say, did not include a 3 kilohertz adjustment. And I wonder if you could, whereas in the 2018 research it did. I wondered if you could talk a bit about that, or about, like, you know, if you think that in future versions of this, the 3 kilohertz adjustment might get carried forward.
I don't know what you mean when you say the 2018 research included a 3K adjustment. I mean, we took the in-room curve and did bass and treble shelf adjustments, but we never did any experimental work where we had people adjust 3K. Is that what you thought?
So there's a published curve. There's published curves for the one from the statistical model, which predicts listener preferences for over-ear and on-ear, around ear and on-ear, whatever it is. And there's the one from factors that influence preferences for listener preferences for bass and treble, I think, the 2015 one. And if you overlay those two curves and divide one by the other, in addition to the shelves having slightly different values, which, I mean, of course they do, that's just sort of, there's some fuzz there. There is a notch out of the ear gain in the 2018 one. It's been the subject of an immense amount of internal discussion in the audiophile ultra nerd community, and nobody is quite sure of why it's there. And there's been a lot of, I guess you could say you caused a schism within the religious sects about whether or not that was sacrosanct or not.
Well, and to just also give a bit of context for why this is particularly relevant for our project as well, we are trying to figure out if we need to build this into the preference bounds.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was a long time ago in terms of research years, but it may have been reduced just because we did some experiments over in Germany, I recall, and I came back and I said, well, I was looking at comments and I said, you know, there seems to be some comments about too much 3K, and I may have just reduced it based on that feedback. So if there's a difference between the curves, it's either an error or could have been purposely slightly reduced.
The papers do mention some adjustment in 3K based on expert listener feedback, so that might be able to refer.
Yeah. So yeah, there's no doubt that that's a highly personal frequency region, and people have different sensitivities to that region. Sometimes it's hearing, just their hearing thresholds indicate that, and sometimes it's could be related to their ear canal, where the first resonance shifts up or down. We just finished the project on ear canal acoustics, and we got a database of 20 ear canals, and they certainly, depending on the length of the canal, that resonance can shift up or down between 2 kilohertz and 4 kilohertz. Not
Which
quite
of
as.
course,
Yeah, go ahead.
if you have a target curve that has a peak at 3 kilohertz, but the listener's peak doesn't line up, they're going to perceive that as a dip followed by a peak, and so it might be a safer, more conservative target to just kind of round off that area,
according to the Gestalt model.
But yeah, but the way however that 3 kilohertz adjustment happened, we've all been laying awake at night thinking about it.
Yeah.
Well, you guys need to get a more balanced life if you're lying awake at night.
Ain't that the truth?
That is
I think it's a good message for basically everybody
rather
watching this stream
evidently
as well.
There is
So-
some
We have
So-
spent
results
dozens
from
of man hours debating this single filter.
Yeah, I just, yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about it too. I haven't been lying awake at night thinking about it, but I recently wrote a IDR, which for those who don't know, it's an invention disclosure, which is the preliminary thing to a patent, and I wrote something about that area. So I think it's an area that's ripe for investigation, and I think our next round of method of adjustments, we may well include a filter in that region.
Yeah, well, and it seems that in the listening test that you showed us the results of in your talk, most of the curves that were highly preferred did have less energy at 3 kilohertz relative to kind of the rest of that treble region. Like the sound guys curve did very well, and it's quite rounded off at 3 kilohertz. And then IE 2019 as well, relative to the
2024
frequencies above, has less 3 kilohertz. So I think that even just very preliminarily with the small sample size, the results of your most recent listening test show that even on the 5128, it seems that a reduction there is preferred.
Yeah, it would be interesting to throw that graph up on the screen if someone
Might be able
has
to
it.
do that, yeah.
Yeah.
I have it.
I have it up on the screen. Can you let me know what the slide is?
It's
Oh.
a slide where all 6 curves are plotted on top of one
That
another.
is on page 96.
Okay, thanks. I'm just going to pull it up for folks. No, it is not on page 96, Blaine. Oh, page 96, not in the actual. I see what you're saying.
Yes, no, slide number, it's, I think, 80 some odd, 89th, 88th? Yeah, 88th.
You were just there.
6 headphone targets evaluated on the BNK 5128. That one?
Yes.
Yeah.
You have it?
Yeah, I got it up. It's up on the stream now.
Why can't I see it?
Oh,
Because
yeah.
it's only on the stream. He's not sharing it. I can
Oh.
share.
I have it here in my PowerPoint. Let me find it.
Let's see if I can increase the scale so people can see it easier here on the stream. There we go. Chat,
Yeah.
does that look okay?
Chad, is this real?
Yeah.
That's better.
Yeah, so if you look at these 6 curves, I mean, there's the obvious difference in bass with the BNK 5128 diffuse field. It's got the least amount of bass. There are some differences, but for most of the curves, they're very close in the bass. They're all very similar up until about a kilohertz, and then they start to diverge. And yeah, so the sound guys has the least amount of treble at 1K and throughout that whole region. And then the next preferred one was the Harman IE 2019. So it has, the second most energy, less than the BNK. But it also has more bass, right? It's got So there is this relationship between energy in the 3 to 6K can be offset by increasing the bass, and the lack of, let's call it for argument's sake, lack of treble in the sound guys curve is somewhat offset by less bass compared to the Harman. So it seems as though you can satisfy the same people by increasing or decreasing the relative amount of treble and bass between those two areas.
Just a question on that.
Yeah.
As far as, so this is, we're talking about, about in-ear stuff here. As far as the preliminary work that you guys have been doing, or that you've been doing on this, testing these, we noticed that the sound guys curve performs similarly well to the Harman IE, much significantly more ear gain result.
Yeah.
And what you're just saying here is that, there's obviously a difference in the bass too, right? And so this maybe offsets that. But what I was wondering is, so this study is 13 people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do we have a sense of if those people were, well, first of all, like which, how the people who rated the sound guys curve highly compared to how those same people would have rated the Harman IE? Oh, and vice versa?
Yeah, so...
Like, is it a separate cluster, should we say?
Yeah, if you go to another slide...
Yeah.
My PowerPoint is
Well,
slide
maybe
100. It's where I show the ratings.
Yep, I got it.
Yeah. So, so if you have it up, I have it in front of me. I can talk about it. So sound guys, there were 2 clusters of listeners, and it was based on, cluster analysis. Cluster analysis basically looks at all the preference ratings for all the headphones, and it clusters people into groups based on how similarly they rated the headphones. And it identified two groups of listeners, and the cluster 1 is the blue mean ratings with the 95% confidence intervals, and then the orange cluster are the other group of listeners. And the first thing you notice is the error bars are much larger than the cluster 1. So these people in orange tend to be less trained, less experienced. It was 5 listeners, and 2 of them were females, and the other 3 were males who are not trained. So just off the start, you can say that the orange cluster 2, they tended to give higher ratings to the B&K 5128 and the Harman, AP Harman 2018 version 2, which was essentially some translation from the grass to the B&K curve from 2018. It was the over ear target, and they increased the treble by 2 dB, and you can see that there was quite a difference in opinion. Most of the trained people found this one too bright, and that these other people found it to be okay. In fact, it's tied with the Harman IE 2019. So there seems to be they seem to like brighter headphones, I would say, as a general summary. Go ahead.
It's interesting that you say that group, it had more females in it, because your previous work had shown generally that women preferred a reduction in treble when compared to men. The men had more bass, more treble when compared to women in the method of adjustment. So yeah, that's a little bit inconsistent, and so there might be some sample size issues here.
Oh, for sure, yeah. It's only
2 females, right? So
2 females. And if they had a bad day, maybe they
Yeah.
So if you look at the cluster 1, though, Sound Guys was rated the highest overall. It was just, I don't know if it was statistically significant compared to the Harman IE, but there's basically 3 or 4 headphones in there that are all very close, and depending on the listener, the one may prefer one over the other. So
Yeah.
so so if we go back to those 6 curves,
Sure. Got it.
there are I don't have it yet.
96.
You know, the most variance is in that region. You know, where the curves vary the most is between 2 and 8K or whatever. And of course, there's high frequency differences. But given that 3 of these headphones were tied overall, there's certainly some suggestion that having adjustments in that frequency range is important to satisfy a particular listener or segment.
Now, this was 13 people for this one. The previous research for in-ears, so for Harman IE29, the total amount of people there was around 20. Is that correct?
No, I mean, well, it depends. We did a large study with 31 headphones, and I think it had 70 or 80 listeners in it.
Oh, for in-ear stuff.
Oh, yeah. You're talking over ear?
No, I'm talking Harman IE 2019.
Well, 2017.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was based on listening tests with 70 or 80 people. We didn't do, if you're talking about method of adjustment, it was a much smaller group.
Right. This is probably a dumb question, but were any of the 13 people in this study part of that larger group?
Yeah, there was. This was mostly people. They were all people from Northridge in our lab. So I was in it. Todd Welty, and maybe 3 or 4 other people who were with Harman at that time and were included.
Gotcha.
But I mean, I really have to emphasize this data that we're looking at is very much preliminary, and based on 13 people, I would call it a pilot experiment. I wouldn't attach a lot of, it's not the final answer.
Right.
I mean, we were going to start some new cults around it.
you know
Yeah.
that.
It already started.
That's true.
Yes,
It has
yes.
already started. There's already sectarian violence over this one. I'm a reformed Shaunist.
Yeah, I've had to beef up my security the last few days.
Yeah.
Getting bomb threats and
Yeah.
Yeah. Headphone reviewers showing up at your house.
yeah. No, it's yeah. I mean, it's interesting that there's such an enthusiastic community that cares about this stuff. It's it's interesting. It's good because I've worked so many years in loudspeakers, and there's not nearly the interest and enthusiasm and thirst for knowledge in that domain than what you see for headphones.
Now, I wanted to drill down a bit more on the IEM stuff if I could. So what we see from these results is seemingly 2 curves that are, let's say, leading, but those 2 curves are very different, as Joel has noted here. Obviously, we need, with the higher sample size, we'll get a little bit more confidence as to maybe which one is the leading one or not. But one of the things that has consistently come out for me, and maybe this is just me anecdotally, but I often find that when a headphone is not preferred, it's not intolerable, it's just not preferred. Whereas sometimes with IEMs, if something is not preferred, it is actually intolerable. So the threat, I don't know how to put this. Basically, there are bound to be people who maybe for one person, Harman IE 2019 is great, but for another person, Harman IE 2019 is not It's not even just that it's slightly, not quite in their wheelhouse for what they like. It's just very much so that they can't even use it. It's very fatiguing. And I wanted to get your sense on if for IEMs we need to have a better way of basically representing that difference.
Yeah, it's interesting how divisive it can be. I mean, I think we have 3 or 4 of the people that just can't stand it on this call, right? And yet I've never found it to be that way. I'm always struggle. I'll read a review, I'll see measurements, and then I'll try it, or I'll measure some myself, and it's maybe sometimes on the edge depending on the music, but yeah, it's very divisive. It's sort of like everything in America right now with politics. You have the Democrat curve and the Republican curve, and neither one they can't be in the same room, right?
Well, it's okay because we're Canadian, so we can just,
Well, I've been following your politics recently, and I see some parallels there. I mean, people
Your
just
politics. Aren't you Canadian?
Well, yeah.
You really fully divorced yourself from the country.
No, I'm both. I'm recently became an American, so I'm dual citizen. But I've noticed that similar trends are happening in Canada. So I don't know if it's wise to move back to Canada because we may just be ahead of the curve here.
I think you're probably all right in California.
Yeah. So I forget what your question was now.
Well, I mean, the reason why I'm interested in this as well has actually to do more with product development. And given that you guys are very much more interested in like TWS and stuff like that, where there is the possibility of, for example, pushing a firmware update, to the devices that exist. And I'm wondering if, say, for example, you end up with a larger sample size, a result where there really isn't a meaningful, leader, and you have 2 fairly dominant clusters. Does that kind of give reason to basically supply, a tuning adjustment to products that exist, or maybe the lesser version of that would be to supply an alternative option for people with, for new TWS products that get developed?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're spot on that we need to provide some method of adjustment based on what segment you fall into. And we started to do this with the Mark Levinson 5909. It has 3 bass enhancements depending on what cluster you're in. We don't have anything specific for TWS JBL, except it provides an EQ app on the phone. But it's not really, it's got many bands that you can adjust. It's very flexible, but nothing really specifically focused on this frequency range. And I can see an advantage of providing that going down the road. For wired headphones, I'm not sure. I suppose if you don't have the means to provide EQ, active EQ, AKG had this solution in the K5005 a few years ago with different filters, passive filters that you could insert in the barrel of the headphone. So that could be another way of dealing with that.
I have a question. What would you think about, because audiophiles are all about their outboard gear, what would you think about a headphone amplifier that had fairly simple user controls that would allow for adjusting things like the relative level of bass and treble, perhaps adjusting the level of the ear gain, etc.?
I think that's a good idea. That's something I wrote in this IDR. That's a simplified way of tuning the most important parameters. And bass, 3K and treble are the parameters, I think.
So if you want to share all of the details of this patent, we can ask all of the Bose and Apple people in the chat to leave, and then you can share us all the details.
Well, I mean, Apple may already know about this. If you look at although I don't know that they provide an adjustment, but if you look at the AirPod, I think it's the AirPod Pro 2 or an earlier version that had, and even the AirPort Max has a reduced level through this area, 3 to 6K, probably closer to Sound Guy's curve. So, and I spoke to someone who left Apple, and their comment was, well, we wanted to make it safer in this region where people are less tolerant of this ear gain. So
Was it
maybe
Gaetan?
Sorry?
Was it Gaetan?
No, it was
Oh.
not him. No, it was someone who left and went to work for a competitor. Gaeta, it's interesting you bring his name up. Gaeta Lorho, of course, did this study in 2012 on target curves for over-ear, and he played with this gain at 3K. He also played with the frequency of that curve, and he found it wasn't really a factor. People didn't really, it didn't really produce the differences in preferences that you might think. But what he did play with was the level of that 3K bump, and he brought it down from, I don't know, 10 or 12 dB, which is the diffuse field target, down to, was it 4 dB, I think?
It's like 4 or 5.
Yeah, so that's a significant drop in level.
Well,
And
it just goes to show. Oh yeah, go ahead.
My contention was that the base of the target was diffuse field, so the base was flat, and I think people, this is something that Crinacle has talked about, is that if you leave the base fixed at flat, people will turn down the gain at 3K to compensate for the fact that there's a lack of base. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah. I mean, that's my own personal anecdotal testing. Do you think that is grounds for additional method of adjustment testing with like more test subjects?
Yeah, I mean, we plan to do more method of adjustments after this talk. Not right in the next hour or so, but
we can do it like right now.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah. We'll be the panel.
There's 7 people right here.
Oh yeah, that's
enough.
That's a bigger sample than most review magazines, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think in the early days when we started doing this, we were concerned about if you give people 2 knobs, do they have the ability to adjust them in a reliable way? So we thought maybe they don't. So we started by fixing the bass and then adjusting the treble, and then we would fix the treble and adjust the bass. And generally speaking, depending on where you set that fixed level, people would adjust the other one accordingly. And there tended to be this 8 dB, this constant 8 dB in gain between, or delta between the bass and the treble. So no matter where you put the bass or the treble, they would always adjust one so that there was this delta of 8 dB.
Right.
I do have a suggestion.
Mm-hmm.
Not really a suggestion, more like maybe just like an idea, and want to get your opinion of it. So using the same kind of concept where we just have a 2-tone adjustment, what if we, for whatever reason, we release a TWS that was effectively tuned to diffuse field? And maybe there might be a default curve at that point. Maybe it's like a plus. We could use the 2015 parameters, for example, which was, I think, +6 and -1, or roughly there. And from there, what we could do is, assuming we can ignore GDPR, just start farming data from all the TWS users, because assuming that they have to use an app regardless. And then would that be valid data, or do you think that it's something that is too noisy to be considered?
Yeah, I mean, I love the idea of gathering data mining from actual users. It's like, it's free, right? You can get a lot of data, doesn't cost you anything. Maybe the server to store the data, but I think that's a great idea. We sold a headphone called JBL Quantum 1. It's a gaming headphone, and it comes with a microphone that you can, with a foam tip, and you can put it in your ear and do a measurement and calibration, and then you can put it in the other ear and do a calibration. And we got something like 10,000 or 20,000 measurements. And then during the project, the Hyperion Lab project, we had people do the same thing. They had their HRTFs measured. We did a 3D scan of their head and torso, and then we had them do this calibration with the headphone. And we found basically the same results from this in-field data that we gathered, that the fit and seal of the headphone was widely, it varied a lot from person to person. So we learned that, we need to do a better job of probably mechanically designing the headphones so that it has a more consistent seal. And I've recently measured a bunch of headphones on humans with and found the same thing, that some very good headphones that measure well have great bass on a 45 CA. If you put them on a human or even a mannequin, you get widely divergent results. So anyways, I think that data gathered in the field can be useful and be very can help guide where product development should go.
Do you think it potentially be like too noisy, or like the data is potentially tainted by a specific subset of users, for example? I'm just trying to iron out like potential kinks in a potential things like this.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, the obvious thing is there a good seal when they're making these adjustments? And if that's, if they turn the bass up 30 dB, that might be an indication that the seal is poor, but you don't know that unless that information is also gathered. Which could be. I mean, if there's a microphone inside the headphone in the TWS, that's something that you know, it's either already measured, because a lot of TWS now have leak detectors built into them. And when I measure things on my test fixture, I often use these. I try out these leak detectors, and they're pretty accurate. So I think. I think you would have to, it's going to be noisy, and you have to sort of take that into account when you're doing analysis.
Which DFHRTF did you mean, Crinacle?
I mean, well, I know you're going to talk about GM1 at this point.
I actually have a question for Sean Olive as opposed to Crinacle, so possibly we can discuss that with Crinacle.
Yes, go ahead.
At a later time, given we have a limited amount of the doctor's time. So there was an interesting question that was raised on Twitter on the note of preference boundaries as an area rather than, and you responded to this, rather than having a hard target, which is, what about the case of a headphone or speaker that sort of zigzags all around the preference bounds but stays inside of it?
Yeah.
And that sort of made me think, do we have data to indicate that would be more or less preferred? Because if you think about speakers in room, you're going to have meaningful amounts of modal resonances, constructive and destructive interference, etc., that would make even an axially very flat speaker, well, pretty wiggly in that area. So,
well, Blaine, you're talking about would smoothness for cluster 1, say, be preferred?
Yeah, well, what data do we have? Like, because this is getting all the targets that have been tested that I'm aware of have been quite smooth. And except for when Sean has tested direct copies of Headphone FR, in which case they're much more wiggly. But do we have data that indicates that, for example, a headphone that has a, let's say, average deviation of less than plus minus 1 dB from the target, from like a smooth line, is more preferred to one that has plus minus 3? Like intuitively, it seems like it should be the case, but
Yeah.
I'm not actually sure if that's true.
Yeah, I mean, the comment on Twitter, it made me immediately think of ITUR BS 1116, which is quoted, and this, the standard's based on listening tests done on highly transparent codecs, but it's been applied, and the standard includes defining the listening room, the acoustic parameters, the speakers, although the speaker is it doesn't specify anechoic spinorama data. It specifies an in-room operational curve, and it has these tolerances, and I think it's third octave bass, but I'm not certain, which is a red flag. But it has these wide tolerances of plus or minus 6 dB to 100 hertz. And then throughout the mid-range, it's plus or minus 3 dB. And then at high frequencies, it goes back to plus or minus. So my point was that because there's no target specified, like there's no flat line indicated in this tolerance bounds, you could have a curve that goes up and down between, from plus 6 dB down to minus 6 dB, and then wiggle through the mid-range, and then go up to minus 6 down to 6 dB. So you could have something that sounds remarkable that fits in that tolerance boundaries, very flat, smooth. You could have something that sounds horrible and is intolerable. So it could have resonances. So just specifying a tolerance boundary, I don't think is sufficient, because it doesn't guard you against those, maybe they're, what do you call them, outlier cases where something deviates widely from flat and smooth, and people can claim, wow, we're meeting headphone.com tolerance boundaries or preference bounds.
Well, and the other thing is that the largest groups would fall into the lower third, roughly, of those bounds, whereas fewer people would be, let's say, class 3 listeners. Right.
So
Yeah.
the question I had there, though, if you don't mind, I'd just like to pick at a little more. Obviously, we know that for some threshold of wiggliness of FR, like plus minus 6, I think it's uncontroversial to say that's going to sound bad. But for a given level of resolution, do we have a strong idea of where it becomes insignificant? Like with headphones in particular, we could theoretically have something that even at 12 or 24 points per octave is very, very smooth and very closely follows a target. But do we know that like that's going to be more preferred than something with 3 dB of variation at the extremes, or 4 or 5? More than 12, absolutely. But like, I'm wondering if we have data there, if that's just sort of because I intuitively, I want to say, of course it will sound better. But then I'm like, but how do I know that?
Yeah. I mean, I can't think of any data from headphone studies. There's been studies done on detection of resonances. I mean, I did some studies with Floyd Toole on that, where we measured the absolute threshold of a resonance with different test signals, and we defined the absolute threshold at which these things can be heard. And for a broadband resonance with pink noise, I mean, we can hear half a dB. Now, it doesn't mean it would change our preference, but it's audible. And for a medium Q resonance, it's maybe 3 dB. And for medium Q being 10, I think, and then a high Q resonance like 50. I mean, we can tolerate on music, almost, I think, 10 dB. So there was a guy on Facebook who made fun of the Sundara. He's the topic came up, does Hi-Fi Man make good headphones? I said, well, I haven't measured any on the 5128, but the Sundara I thought was a decent headphone, and he pulled up a curve of the Sundara with this very high Q resonance. It's almost, I mean, it was hard to see. It was so narrow. And I said, well, I don't think that would be audible. So I think you can sort of extrapolate from this resonance data what might be audible and what might not be, and that would be one approach.
Well, at the moment, it's often up to the reviewer to basically indicate, basically how, if there are perceptual issues, like it's not obvious from the data itself that, a given wiggliness is acceptable or, intolerable. And the person basically guiding the process is the one who has to say this is good or this is bad. And so that ultimately leaves us at a problem where it is up to the individual rather than being able to just, infer that. And so that's why I actually really like Listener's approach. I'm not sure if you've seen it, but there's sort of like a shading with the largest cluster. And the issue that we run into is that it creates a lot of visual clutter, basically.
Yeah, it doesn't look good.
Yeah.
But it is absolutely a compromise on that front.
Yeah. So I mean, I think deviations, or you see wiggles that are plus or minus 1.5 dB. I mean, that might be concerning. Anything more than that would be concerning. But I think, yeah, you have to listen to it. Maybe you can equalize it to be flat and then compare it with the version that's not been equalized. And if you put pink noise in, which is the most sensitive signal to hearing these artifacts, and you can tell there's a difference, maybe you can bring it up but that doesn't mean you can hear the differences with music. So you might want to try both.
Mm-hmm.
But ideally, it would be nice to have a definitive answer using objective measures.
Agreed. We haven't heard from Oratory 1990 yet. I wonder if there's any questions from you.
I'm mostly just following along. I'm bringing my questions later.
Okay.
I have a question concerning Constantine. Sean, how did you like the wine that Constantine got you?
Oh, I mean, I haven't tried it, but
Oh.
we flew back to LA and then we drove up to where I am right now, which is Tiburon. So it's sitting safely at home in my wine cellar. And but I posted a photo of it on Twitter, and all the Germans and Austrians are saying, "Oh, that's excellent wine." So I think he did a good job.
You'll have to compare it to the one we sent.
Yeah, well, that was a while ago. So
yeah, we'll have to send another one, I guess.
My auditory memory, or my wine olfactory memory, is very short, so you have to send 2 more.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, we're all looking forward to your wine review.
Yeah, and I have to say that it was wraps in like 50 layers of paper and plastic and bubble wrap. It took me 20 minutes, and I thought that it's like a Russian, what are those dolls called?
Yeah.
Where you open one and there's a
Matryoshka doll, yeah.
nesting doll or whatever.
Yeah.
And I thought this was done as a joke. It's like, how hard can I make this to unwrap? Or maybe the harder you work, it's the IKEA effect, where if you put a lot of work into building something or unwrapping it, you're going to appreciate it more. So
anything that's worth having is worth working for. Yeah.
But it makes sense though, because if you've ever had a bottle of wine break in your suitcase, it can really ruin your trip.
Yeah, I've seen what people do to luggage at the airport, so I wanted to make sure.
I went to Canada once, and I always take back wine for my sister from California, and I put 2 bottles in each of my kids' suitcase, as well as my own. And when my son got out of Toronto, out of the airport, he opened his suitcase. Both bottles had cracked open, and he was really pissed, and it kind of ruined his trip. So
Yep.
because his clothes smelled like wine even after he washed them. So I'm very careful now when I travel with wine.
Yep, that's fair. I know Joel has many more questions, and so does Blaine. I don't know if the rest of you guys, I do too, but I feel like I've been asking a lot of them, so I want to defer to one of the other guys.
Joel, please.
Sure. Well, so I think that it's really interesting that you sort of have a preliminary comparison between the blocked canal measurements of the 5128 and the open canal, so that we can sort of start looking at the canal transfer function. I wanted to ask you a little bit about some of the details of the blocked canal setup that you're using there, because as you noted in your talk, it's very perplexing that we saw directional effects from the canal. And so I was wondering if you could share a little bit more about that setup, because as far as I'm aware, headphones.com is going to try to replicate that at some point in the future and see if they can find the same effect.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I was a little surprised as well, as were my colleagues. And the first thing they said was they thought maybe the positioning of the microphones in the blocked canal was not in far enough. So yeah, so we use these Sound Professional in-ear microphones for the block measurements, and of course the open ones we're using the couplers. And I don't know, do you have a graph of these differences?
Do you know which slide it's on, Joel?
I can find it for you.
Okay, and I'll pull it up. I think I know which one you're talking about, but I want to make sure.
I want to say it's somewhere in the 70s, but I'm not positive.
It's page 71, 72, 73.
Okay, thanks.
And there's one graph where I show the different, I compare, I divide them, and you can see the effect.
Like of the slideshow.
Yeah. Sorry, but for whatever reason, the PDF is
The PDF, page 67.
page 67. Okay. So I think I like the one on 75. Yeah, I think I see it. Let me know if this is the right one.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and if you were using one of the Sound Professional's mics, that might explain if the mic capsule wasn't positioned close enough to the canal entrance. I'm not sure. I'm assuming that this is one of the Sound Professional's products that I'm aware of. They might make things that I'm not aware of, but
I highly doubt that.
one of the one that I'm thinking of kind of sits in the contra bowl and does just kind of seal with the canal, but it does sit outside the canal entrance, which could definitely explain some of the differences that we're seeing here, because your data diverges from, your data is further from what we would get in human data from the 711 coupler even, which seems a little unusual to me. I would expect intuitively the 51282 to measure closer to humans and not further from them.
Yeah, the only caveat I have here, we also measured block canal with our custom Mannequin, which we call Archie. And we didn't use the Sound Professionals. We used actually a B&K microphone that's very carefully mounted from inside the head. It's a B&K array microphone, and I can't divide out the coupler versus the blocked ear canal because it doesn't have a blocked ear. We're hoping to remedy that and have so that would be the definitive experiment, to take something with a flush mounted microphone from inside and then compare it to an ear canal response to see whether this directional effect with the blocked ear still holds up. But
for what it's worth, we do have some simulation work that's been done on sound propagation in and around the canal entrance, which does imply that the canal is non-directional from the entrance inward.
yeah. So
But you have to be at the ear reference point or at the ear entrance point, which is right at the
Yeah, the ear
interface between
reference
the
point is still
canal
directional.
and
The ear entrance point isn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
the ear reference point, which is, be nice
Ear
if we had
reference point is in
It's
the
like-
pinna. Entrance point is directly at the beginning of the ear canal, so where the conchact ball ends.
Yeah. So, I mean, the fact that it's so controversial means it needs to be followed up and repeated. I'm not, like I said, this is all preliminary, and so it definitely needs investigation because it surprised everyone. So,
Yeah.
I wouldn't really take this as fact until it gets, validated and repeated.
For future, for like what you guys are going to be doing with other targets, just to continue, you mentioned in your talk you're going to continue to also test additional targets. Is there any chance that we'll get IEF, Crinacle's IEF in there as well?
No. Okay. Let me be clear. Technically, there is no target curve for IEF neutral, at least for the 5128. I have shown a preference for the negative 0.8 dB tilt with, let's say, an 8 decibel bass boost within Harman parameters, but I wouldn't put that on anyone. That's just my own personal, my own personal adjustments. But there's a reason why when you go onto my graph tool, there, at least on the 5128, there is no target that you can select besides diffuse field anymore, because at that point I'm trying to put forward the notion of adjust to your taste. Just tilt however you want it, boost the bass however you want it, and then you just move on from there. So by all technicality, there is no IEF neutral, at least for the 5128. There is one for the 711, but that's kind of just like extrapolating the deltas from 5128 to 711s. Again, thanks to Griffin for the data for that, but I wouldn't really call that a target curve either.
Right.
Do
I mean,
you
go ahead,
Corinne, when you listen to if you were to EQ an IEM based on 5128 data, do you reduce energy at 3K, or do you like the full 3K energy?
I reduce 3K by about 2 to 3 decibels personally. I like the 2018? Yeah, it's the 2018 filters for 3K. Yes. I like that personally. On top of that, I would say I'm kind of in between the 5128 diffuse field as well as the JM1. I'm not quite at the level of JM1, but I wouldn't say that I'm at the level of the diffuse field as well. So yeah, that's kind of like that's kind of where I am now. So you can't put IEF neutral in the studies because there's no such thing anymore. Congratulations.
I mean, there's the same is true for like the headphones.com stuff. Like we don't actually have a target. The only thing that we're doing is we're testing out JM1 as a baseline. And that's something that I think we talked about this, Sean, as well. That basically, I mean, it is still a work in progress because as we noted, we still need to also measure the canal transfer function of the 5128 itself to be able to figure this out. But it is just a theory, right? So I guess the question would be, do you foresee any possibility of testing the population average DFH-RTF or the approximated population average DFH-RTF as a baseline to see if people would adjust bass and treble differently compared to how maybe it would have been done in the past? Because as Crinacle noted as well, how people adjust the bass is largely going to be determined by the rest of the response and how much treble level there is as well.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we have a database of diffuse field HRTFs right now of 350 people that we've measured. So that data exists. It's
so it could be an even better version, basically, rather than relying on the Hammershine-Mahler ISO 11904 or whatever it is.
Yeah, assuming, yeah, we were also very careful to pick I don't know how to describe it, a balance between men and women, different ages. Yep. Above 18 years old, we didn't include anyone below 18 because of the there's legal problems trying to get people who are minors in to do these experiments. And we tried to pick a culturally, ethnically diverse group. So we had white people, Asians, so on. So we think it's one of the most diverse sets of data that's existing. And we know some of our current standards like KEMAR and to that extent, even 5128, we don't really know much about how diverse, is it just based on old white Danish guys or?
Memory serving, isn't the KEMAR based in part on Air Force recruits from the 70s? I may be misremembering there.
Well,
definitely not evenly balanced, put it that way.
I heard it was designed for cosmonauts to be, and it's very small, so that they could fit inside the space cap. So they recruited people who were small so they could fit in the spacecraft, and that basically drove the standard. And as far as the coupler goes itself, the 711 coupler, I think it's based on one or two people who actually the guy who owned the company.
Hervé Brule and Gunnar Rasmussen, last I checked.
Yeah. So there you go. We talk about personalization, and it's any surprise given that the standards are based on a very small sample.
So, as far as the theory, though, is concerned, about using a diffuse field baseline based on a population average, if we can get a better population average than what may exist in Hammershoy and Mahler, do you think that idea makes sense given the similarity with the over-ear diffuse field head-related transfer function and the 19 speakers in the room?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just looked preliminarily at what the average diffuse field response is, and there is some indication, it's in the talk, there is some indication that at higher frequencies, there's more high frequencies in the current test fixtures, based on what you would measure at a blocked ear of a large population. So, and I think that jives with Joel's data from Hammershoy and Mahler. I think his data maybe have even less high frequencies than what we measured, but it's kind of in the ballpark.
Any chance we could get that data?
Is the block canal data from those 350 people using the Sound Professionals microphones?
That's a very good question, Blaine.
Yeah.
If it is, would you be willing to consider redoing it using Fabian Brinkman's Pirate microphone?
Yeah, the Pirate design is excellent.
Yeah, I'll have to look into if you can share the specs on those two.
I mean,
mics.
if we weren't nerdy before, I mean, this is like we're talking about different brands of in-ear test equipment.
Well, it's not a brand. Fabian is a guy. He's
okay.
one of the guys doing personalization of headphones research in it's somewhere in Germany. Deutsche Technische Universität something. Constantine, do you remember? No. All right. No. We'll dig up the citation and we'll link it to you. Really, really interesting work and a lot of focus on measurements on human heads.
Yeah.
I think it's in Berlin.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, and I can speak, at least personally, with the Pirate capsule design. I can get very consistent results from one fitment of the mic to another when I do my own blocked canal measurements.
The idea behind this
I see
capsule is
almost
that it's inserted directly into the ear canal, so the capsule, so the point where you record the sound pressure is as close to physically possible at the ear entrance point, which is right at the intersection between ear canal and concha. So it would be closer to where you would lose the directivity
canal sizes.
So before I remeasure 350 people at I don't know how much money we were paying them, an hour of their time, it would be probably useful to take these mics and remeasure the 19 speakers at the blocked ear of these mannequins. That would be an interesting exercise.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, let me know how to get a hold of these, and I'd definitely look into that.
I like
we can build you some and send them over.
Well, I mean,
Oh.
the method of fabrication is literally what Todd used for the Harman pinna, like the modified one. So it's 3D printing a mold and then casting them.
Ah, okay.
So that's 100% they can do it.
Yeah, I also have these. Do you know this guy named Florian Denk from?
Yes.
Yeah, he's done some very interesting research on. But he came up with this microphone called the Hear piece, and it has. It's fabricated by a company in Germany that make professional headphones, but it's got multiple microphones in it, and you can measure. It's got microphones outside in the concha at different points. It's got a couple inside, and it was really developed for measuring diffuse field HRTFs and trying to figure out how to equalize at the DRP so that you get a transparent open ear response when you have something stuck in your ear. But you couldn't use this for what we're talking about. But
yeah, because the Hear piece basically is a measurement at the ERP, right? Because it fills part of the concha.
Yes.
It's super interesting because it gives you directional incidence data for stuff coming into the concha, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
But it's like anyway, yes.
We bought two of them, one closed, one open, and we never use them but they exist.
They're interesting.
Yeah, they are. At some point I'm going to use them for something.
You got to justify the expense to the accounting people somehow.
So these microphones you're referring to have to be built. It's a kit. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a specification.
It's an open source specification for blocked canal microphones.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I may have come across it at some point, but I don't recall. And
they're not too tricky. It's a plug with a small microphone capsule inside it. It's
okay.
It's not really. It's not that complicated.
But the key thing is you can get it fairly deeply inserted and get very repeatable data.
Yeah, the size is essentially the ear tip. Yeah.
So how does it get you repeatable? I mean, obviously you can get it inserted in a very consistent depth. How does it do that?
It's the design of the shape is the key part. They measured a ton of ear canals in order to design a shape that is going to seat kind of optimally into people's ear canals and lead to a consistent insertion depth. So it does come in a variety of sizes. There's kind of like small through, I think, extra large or whatever the size is. But once you find the size that works well for you, you can get it inserted to a very consistent depth every time.
And does it have a preamp does it use a battery or?
So
well, you put whatever capsules.
Uses the MEMS mic, so it would need a bias supply. Like you need a small like DIY amplifier for this. I would be happy to sketch one out if you like, but I'm absolutely sure that you have people who are better at that than me. But you just need some small omnidirectional capsule to put in there, and it's by default it's a small, I think, top entry MEMS. Bottom?
Okay, so it comes with the MEMS microphone, is that right?
Well, it's literally just a spec. So you build so it's a spec. It comes with 3D models. You have to do it.
And
the
you have
MEMS
to.
microphone that they specify has been discontinued.
I mean, you can find their substitute.
We went to China recently in November and brought back from our engineering lab a very tiny MEMS microphone. So I think I have the perfect candidate.
Excellent.
Almost small enough that we're thinking of using it to insert in people's ear canals down to the DRP and measuring.
I would be so hyped if you did, because the last time
unofficially though we couldn't officially do that because legal would not allow us to take the risk of tickling people's eardrums.
Well, don't worry, we won't tell legal.
So I tell this anecdote a bit, but I remember in one of Mead Killian's things on his DF thing, where he did the DF things with the probe mic, he mentioned the positioning method that they used for the probe tube was to insert it until the listeners reported the thump of the silicon tube hitting their eardrum and then
Yeah.
withdraw it by a millimeter.
That seems
Well-
unsafe.
Yeah, I don't know. I've never had probe microphones stuck down my ear canals, and
I think you're the only one here who hasn't.
You could
Yeah.
do pretty, like, I'm just thinking of, like, you know, when people do like custom ear molds, you could probably figure out something reasonable with a MEMS mic in that, given the process that they do, you know.
The main problem with that is the high cost per individual. So
Yeah.
that's why Pirate exists, is just something that's more en masse. Because like,
yeah,
imagine if we told Sean, hey, you have to get ear molds for all 350 people, and then you have to individually modify each of those ear molds to produce an
No.
in-ear microphone
No.
for each of the left and right ears.
You just need 13. That's it.
Oh my gosh.
no. So there's other ways of. So I mean, you have to do that if you're measuring HRTFs. If you're trying to measure the sound pressure at the eardrum, there's people working on methods of estimating what that might be without having to stick a probe mic down your ear. And that's something we've been working on lately. And if we refine it to the point where we think it's accurate, that's another thing I'd like to do when we do this large study with several hundred people, is to actually estimate what the pressure would be at their eardrum, so that we actually, and from that you might be able to predict their ear canal geometries. But more importantly, you'll know how much people's ear canals change the sound, and be able to see, does that affect where they may adjust these filters.
I know Blaine has more questions.
Well, I have one more question.
Okay.
It's less deep in the nerd weeds, but it's something that I wanted your personal opinion on. So,
you call them nerd, I call them headphone cognoscenti.
That's
a bit more charitable of a description
than I am.
Yeah.
No, but so sort of rehashing the question about tolerances, one of the things that sort of is a standing problem with our tolerance mask right now is that it attempts to account for at least 3 sources of variation, right? One is like the different clusters of preference. One is the relative stability of people's preference ratings for different things, which isn't absolutely stable. And one is like any individual interactions with a given headphone, which might produce additional variations separate from preference.
You're talking about
one of
headphone
those is
transfer
kind of
function effects.
one of those is kind of unknowable, the HPTF thing. But for the cluster things, we have that data, and we can enhance that data and get like more nailed down of, instead of having one giant mask, we could have, say, this headphone is closest to the more base class. So we could have a much narrower tolerance mask around that, which could address some of the concerns about having an overly wide window. But do you think that would be a good way of looking at things, or is it better to keep it with a single visualization? Because obviously you can't show all the tolerance masks overlaid with each other, because then that just turns into kaleidoscopic hell. But it would be better to show, for the known segment of people who prefer less bass and more treble, this is how this headphone fits into the variations within that preference band? Or would it be better to keep it in the majority?
Yeah, I don't know. The having the if the headphone falls into class 3 or class 2, it might be instructive to have the mask put in that over that particular target. I guess what we don't know is we don't know what the tolerance mask is for each target. I mean, I think the mask you're showing right now just covers
all of them. Yeah,
well,
so that would be one where we actually have to do that test ourselves. We would need to, or you would have to give us the
data from the data from the dendrogram would for the clusters would probably.
But I mean, like that's something we can replicate. Basically, the question though is, do you think that that's obviously it gives us a more precise window into, is this headphone good for a subset of people? but are we losing out too much in intelligibility if we basically say every headphone has to be considered to be tailored to a specific subgroup?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's so much easier if the headphone is active and has adjustable DSP, then you just design it so it can be adapted to all three classes. But if it's not, then you really want to know how it measures and which class it would best satisfy. And then you mentioned HT interactions with the test fixture. That's something that, like the headphone I mentioned, Quantum, which has, a lot of variations from person to person. That's something that not necessarily is accounted for when you measure it on a 5128 or a Keymar. So there needs to be some way to quantify, how it varies depending on the size of the head or the shape of the pinna. That's why in my presentation I showed you some different sized heads that came out of this study of 350 people, and one of the purposes is to measure the headphone on each size head to see how it might perform given a certain circumference and shape of pinna. So that would be useful.
Thank you.
My last question that I had on my mind, and I see somebody else actually mentioned this in chat. I'm not sure everybody here went to the talk on MDEX, but certainly Sean, you and I did, and I think a number of other folks here did as well. And I wanted to get your thoughts on the multidimensional audio quality score from Head Acoustics and basically what they're doing.
Yeah, I think I haven't personally used it yet. I have a trip planned. I haven't got the exact date yet, but to go to the Head Acoustics lab in Michigan, and Jacob invited me and spent some time there. I've started to talk to people who are using it, like Jude Mansella. I think he's starting to use it. Sound Guys recently announced that they're going to be using it. So it will be interesting to compare their data, or what MDEX says versus our own measurements and listening test data. Just to summarize it, it includes, what is it, 3 or 4 metrics. One's based on spectral balance or timbre. One's based on.
Did we lose? We lost
Sean?
Sean.
We've lost Sean.
He's gone.
No.
Get him back.
I hope he's not just still talking and
I-
answering the
I-
question.
You know that this probably is Head Acoustics trying to snipe him, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Jacob's waiting in chat, and he's. In the meantime, while we're trying to get Dr. Olive back, maybe his battery just died on his computer or something.
He may have.
Do you guys have any thoughts or just additional sort of commentary in general?
On MDEX?
Not
On
necessarily,
MDEX?
not necessarily on MDEX, but we could if you guys would like.
I mean, I'm just happy that a Singaporean company got the top score.
What was?
Is creative?
Oh.
Singapore?
Sean!
Oh,
Yeah.
oh,
Uh,
he's
that was-
returned.
Back.
That was a rookie mistake. My battery on my laptop.
God.
Andrew called it.
So
You were
what?
so obsessed with the view.
Yeah, I think when I turned my desk around to give a nice view, I think the battery, the power cord came out. So because it comes out easily, it's one of those new Apple Airs that has the magnetic power cable, so it just comes off
Oh, no.
easily. Yeah.
Oh, we're good.
So you were saying something about you were happy some top headphone came out first on MDEX?
Oh yeah,
Oh.
I mean the creative Alvana Ace, which is a Singaporean company.
Okay,
So,
have you heard it, Crin?
I've not heard it, but
I have.
guess now I have to.
It's bad.
Okay. Okay.
It's bad. By default, it's
Are you
quite
going
bad.
against research?
Well, that's
How
why I thought
dare
it was
you?
quite entertaining to see it score very highly on MDEX.
Oh dear.
Sound Guys
I mean,
has
like
begun
full disclosure.
publishing.
Yeah.
So has Sound Guys started publishing MDEX?
Mhm. Yeah, and
Okay.
the scores. My read of the scores is that they seem quite suspect.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Okay, so if we're gonna assassinate MDEX, we should just have Jacob on. He would love to.
Yeah,
be
I
on here
don't
and
want
actually defend this
to.
stuff.
No, I don't want to do that. What I'm more curious about is what you guys made of Jacob's talk in general, but then also the big question that I have, and maybe you guys got a chance to chat more with Jacob about this. I have yet to send him an email because I've been planning on it, just haven't had the time. But the third dimension there is immersiveness. So they have timbre, distortion, and immersiveness. And it's a bit unclear to me what goes into immersiveness, because the way I understand the model is they have basically a perceptual algorithm, or they have the perceptual, like they're doing testing on humans, and then they're using that when they're testing headphones on different test fixtures to see how those would acoustically perform based on that model. So I suppose the question on my mind, if anybody has the answer to this, is what the immersiveness metrics are that feed into the system for this.
I did talk to Jacob about that for
Same.
quite a while. He took about an hour of his time for that.
Hmm.
So what they label as immersion or immersiveness is essentially what in the audiophile scene we would call soundstage or localization.
Spaciousness,
Essentially.
yeah.
So there's a few different metrics that fall into that, but the most relevant ones, as I understood it, was essentially how wide or how big is the soundstage in terms that they're used to, as in how wide does the sound, how wide is the sound perceived to be, as in what's the distance, the stereo distance that is perceived by the user, which is, for a headphone, it's not as easy to answer, but the idea behind there is more to be able to distinguish between a single mono loudspeaker, which you can also test with a binaural head. You can also test it with a dummy head, or a stereo setup, or a 5.1 setup. So that was sort of the idea. Remember, MDEX is not just about evaluating different headphones; it's about evaluating different devices that you can use for listening. So this includes a mono Bluetooth loudspeaker. This includes a stereo hi-fi setup. This includes a 5.1 system, as far as I know, as well.
Also a
Most
car,
importantly, it also includes cars.
which
So
has 20, up to 30 speakers in it.
absolutely, yeah. So immersion, different headphones might have different types of immersion, but more importantly, a loudspeaker setup or a mono loudspeaker setup certainly has a different soundstage than headphones, right? So this is more of what they were focused on, not so much how do different headphones have a different sort of soundstage. And then another thing that comes into play a lot is the matching between left and right channel, what we could call localization, right? If the left and right channel are perfectly matched, then we hear a mono signal directly in the middle. And if they're not perfectly matched, be it either in frequency response or in phase or any other measurable metric, then
They must be
would be
correlated.
fuzzy or skewed. Yeah.
So in a certain respect, this also would factor in something like acoustic impedance for situations where headphones would not necessarily be well matched in situ. So I'm thinking of headphones that, like, for example, the HD800S might do well here, in part because of it being particularly consistent.
We're migrating into a space that isn't terribly pertinent to Dr. Olive, and I do want to give our chat room questions. Unless Sean has a take on this might be a good topic for a future stream where we don't have one of the most eminent scientists who we're currently ignoring.
No, I mean, I find it fascinating. It's something I'm interested in. I just don't have a lot of personal experience with it yet. But I mean, if it worked, it would be a revolutionary tool that we would use, because right now we spend a lot of money doing listening tests in cars.
Hmm.
You know, we don't do so many listening tests on speakers anymore, or even headphones, because we rely and trust measurements. But cars, yeah, if it works in cars, that would be would save a lot of time and money.
Does that mean we might in the future see a paper from you evaluating MDEX?
It could be. I mean, right now the cost is kind of prohibitive.
Sure.
How much does MDEX cost?
I'm not
I
sure.
mean,
That's a good question.
One thing that piqued my interest in the talk, Andrew, was that he mentioned, he didn't say you had to use a head acoustics test fixture to do MDEX. He said you could use a B&K 5128. So that should save a lot of costs right off the bat.
Although I'm a bit skeptical about that, to be honest.
Yeah.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
interesting. Why?
Yeah. Not a topic for this chat, but I have some doubts about that, which I
Okay.
expressed to Jacob. Promised to get back to me on that, so I'll have to continue this discussion with head acoustics essentially.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm very interested in it, and I would like to get one and definitely run it through some tests.
Is there a rough ballpark on the price? I'm just very curious now.
5 figures, something like that.
I mean, the 5128 is 5 figures. Is there any bulk? Is it like high end, more expensive than the 5128? I don't know.
It depends on the distribution. You know, B2B prices vary a lot.
Wait, is the Type 4.4 cheaper than the 5128?
Should be.
Marginally.
Oh, okay. All right. I won't divert too much attention. Any other questions for Mr. Sean Olive? Mr. Dr. Professor Sean Olive?
Well, actually, I have a question. Have you shown any interest in testing 4.4 systems as well as the 4.3 you've been doing a lot of your
4.4 would be
the new head acoustics?
Super HMS.
So it's
Super.
the canal from the 4.3, but it terminates at a 6318-4, so the old style coupler.
That's not
Oh.
actually true. It does not
Oh, is it?
terminate with 711 coupler. It's a coupler where the acoustic impedance of the eardrum is as replicated as close to possible to the 4.3, but the diaphragm diameter is larger, therefore giving you a higher signal to noise ratio.
Are you certain that it's not the?
I asked this exact question to Head Acoustics themselves, and that's what they told me.
Because it has the exact same footprint as a 6318-4.
Yes, but it's not a 711 coupler. It's a coupler that is more close to what the Type 4.3 has, but with a larger diaphragm to get a higher signal.
So
This
this
should be the same.
So this would be advantageous for doing distortion measurements to
Yes.
I mean,
Or
if you're in
noise reduction.
extremely, the thing is, are you ever really noise limited in distortion measurements in an
Yes.
era where we
Yes.
have
Yes.
in an era where
Yes.
we have FFTs?
Yes.
Then you're not doing a long enough FFT.
Okay, let's get back on track.
Yeah, I mean, if that's all it offers is the ability to do lower distortion, I guess I'm not as interested, because I don't think distortion really is the limitation, or the big limitation in headphone sound quality.
Shocking.
Not for what we're talking about here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very reasonable.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Any other?
We had
yeah.
some questions in chat earlier for Dr. Olive. If people can rehash them now, I think that we're getting towards the space where we could ask him. If not, I'll have to scroll all the way up in chat. And I know that we're over time, so Sean,
No,
just let us know
I-
when you need to go.
I thought 2 hours would be incredibly long, but it's going by very quickly. So
That's how it is when you're surrounded by fanboys.
Yes.
Well, while we wait for a question, you alluded to an answer after your talk, but I want to see if I can get you to say it on stream. Was there a curve in the testing done that you preferred personally?
I think. I mean, I chose I personally chose the Harman 2004 beta, which is based on
2024 beta.
2024 beta. But I designed the experiment. I wrote the software, the test
Sure.
software.
Yeah, it's
So I was highly, I had listened to them before, so I was highly, biased.
So, someone says cluster 4 listener.
I could be a new cluster.
Yeah.
It's a very
That also
select
means
group.
Sean is directly driving the highly trained listener preference for.
I actually think the 2024. Wow, there's helicopters.
Can't hear them. It's fine.
No, we're after someone, not me, hopefully. I think
Head
that
acoustics is coming.
yes, yeah, Harman HR is coming after me because I said something negative about the quantum. Let me think. I think the 2024. I liked it, except it was a little bright. So I think it needs
Oh,
to
it was
be.
still a little bright.
Yeah, it needs to be adjusted downwards. I think it was 1.4.
Yeah.
It was tuned to the 2018 over year.
2015.
Yeah. So it had 6.6 dB bass boost and 1.4 dB treble cut. So I think the treble needs to come down a little bit.
It was
maybe
one of
you
the
can use a
brightest
different
targets
baseline.
in the whole test.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a completely unrelated question. You spent a bit of time at CanJam.
Mhm.
What were your favorite products that you got a chance to listen to?
Well, I only listened to very few, actually. I went to your booth and I listened to the DCA Dan Clark Audio E3. I listened to something that was based on a heel air motion transformer. Is that correct?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Head?
Yeah.
Head. And one other one.
You listened to that little green IM.
Oh, and the Empyrean 2, right?
Oh, yeah.
The Mirai?
I thought the Empyrean 2 as well.
Yeah, I mean, I have to agree with DMS. I like the Dan Clark over ear close back.
The E3.
Yeah, and I heard it a year ago at SoCal in Dan's hotel room, and I thought at the time it was good. I'm curious to test it on mannequins to see how consistent the seal is. But overall, I thought it was well balanced. The IEM I heard was pretty good too, which apparently is not tuned to the Harman target.
Yes, that was in the dialogue on Twitter about stuff that only just barely fits inside the target bounds. That was actually the example that was used.
Yeah, so it's probably got a little less upper mid range than what I'm used to hearing.
It's a bit less ear gain, but more than I think what people were sort of comparing it to, the other the U12T. So it's
I went to this booth where they had this robotic looking headphone stand.
The Metaxas.
Oh,
booth.
yeah.
Oh, God.
And I think I listened to Electrostatic by Audis.
Serbian.
Yeah. I mean, that wasn't a good experience for me because the headphone amp had two knobs with left and right adjustments.
Yeah. Was that the one where the knobs were the...
Yes.
The
oh,
areola.
my God.
Yeah. So I wonder who the customer is for that product. But
It's a good
Perfect.
question.
Well, people have, channel like different hearing in different ears. Maybe they want to, offset that a little bit.
Well, in fact, I had some tinnitus that day, so it was a shock when I turned on the right one and I could hear some weird things in my ear. So that was disturbing. I left after that because I realized, there's something happening in my right ear, which I wouldn't have known unless I had separate volume controls.
Right. That can also be from if you going on an airplane and getting the not barotrauma, but how when when you go down an airplane, it can mess up your ears, and traveling always has that sort of effect.
Yeah, if you have congestion or
Yeah.
something like that.
There's a bunch of questions from chat.
Mhm.
I don't know if you guys pulled any. in particular.
Well, the most important one. Scott Pledger asks, question for Dr. Olive. What wine would you pair with the HD800S if that was all you could listen to without equalization?
Wine for the HDS
800, yeah.
800.
He's going to say
Something,
Coca-Cola.
something with a full body to add like 6 dB bass to this headphone.
Has to be
Something,
Austrian.
yeah, something with very soft tannins to reduce the 6K bump.
So it'd have to be an aged wine, probably.
It'd be something with a fair amount of aged wine, and probably something with high alcohol. Not because you have to be half wasted to listen to them, but because high alcohol tends to have a lot of base. If it's a very lightweight wine, it typically has less alcohol. I've noticed this with my girlfriend because she likes very heavy, full wines, and the alcohol content seems to be a good predictor. Whenever I give her something with fullness to it, inevitably it has high alcohol.
Can add
Are
structure.
you putting together a predicted preference model?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because when I got into wine, there was a lot of perceptual research being done at UC Davis up here, not far from here, and there was a woman named Ann Noble, Professor Ann Noble at UC Davis, who came up with this wine wheel, right? And the audio industry has basically adapted it now. There's this sound wheel, which has the different colors, and each color represents a different attribute. But it was totally based on or borrowed from the wine industry. So there are some parallels, and people went to the wine industry to see how they do studies and data analysis and how to extract the attributes of sound from listening tests, and they were highly influenced by the food and wine industry.
We have another question from Scott, which is, can we publish the presentation slides from your CanJam presentation somewhere?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's possible. Where would be the best place to do that?
I mean,
Well,
we could host it, I'm sure.
Post it on the audio files if we want to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
basically, we just need your permission.
Yeah,
It's just up on the headphones.com review site, basically.
yeah. Give me a day to think about it, but I don't think there's anything in there that's
There's only like
proprietary.
3 things that say confidential.
Well, all the slides say confidential.
On the
because
bottom.
Yes,
That's
they do.
that's part of the Harman PowerPoint template, but
Mhm.
I mean, a large part of it is already publicly in the domain, like the first 50 slides that review the Harman target. So the only new stuff is, I think it starts at halfway through.
Yep.
So yeah, but I don't see a problem.
The only thing might be if because it's a pilot study, maybe future research would sort of supersede that, and so we need to also publish the next version.
Oh, no.
Good one. Well, there's also a danger that people may take it as final word.
Yeah.
And
That's what I'm worried about if we publish it.
Don't worry.
I-
People have
I would-
already taken it as your final
Oh
word.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
would basically put in a bunch of bad curves and say they scored high, so that the competitors then go out and design headphones to those.
Oh yeah. You could really lead some
Genius.
interesting stuff by withholding, the good stuff and putting
I
out,
think
some...
I think that's called disinformation.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
I approve.
There's none of that on social media, is there?
No, of course not.
So
Everyone tells the truth.
this
Yeah.
isn't a question from the chat, but it just sort of struck me that we should probably talk about this. That there's nobody else that publishes or has published their preference research the way that you guys have done it, or nobody has done it in this sort of comprehensive of a fashion. And I want to get your take if like from a like on the one hand, I get why people would want to why companies would want to withhold that or keep it private, right? Not to share with competitors. But on the other hand, I mean, Harman and Harman brands, it's certainly been effective as a marketing, tool as well, that other people evaluate, like us, we evaluate relative to Harman too, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is huge because it's the reason I still work at Harman after 31 years. And people say, well, why do you work for Harman? I said, because I don't know of any other audio company that would allow me to do this. And I get great pleasure out of sharing research and educating people because audio is so full of misinformation and myths and misunderstanding. So I think Harman's philosophy is, I actually have this in my targets. Every year we have to design targets. And one of my targets is thought leadership. And I have written in there, write so many papers, give so many presentations. This year I'm writing a chapter in Floyd Toole's 4th edition of loudspeakers in rooms, the acoustics and psychoacoustics of rooms. And I'm writing a chapter on headphones, and Todd Welty's writing a chapter on rooms and subwoofers and that sort of thing. So
nice, very cool.
So the idea behind it is, that with what's the expression? With rising tides, all boats float up, or whatever.
No.
I haven't quoted it right, but the idea is, if you want to be a thought leader, you have to be out in front and publish this stuff and not follow. And with it comes, everyone benefits from it. But if you're the first and you actually follow what the science tells you, then people will respect the brands and you gain more from it than not doing it, because then your marketing message is just, we make the best products, you have to trust us.
Well, or something along the lines of a fancy driver story or technological thing, not necessarily about the the how they're actually tuned or the end result.
Yeah, the Harman target was a good case where it took me many years to convince Harman, the people developing headphones, to actually apply it, and that was a bit embarrassing. And our competitors were, applying the science before we were, and a lot of it is just not invented here kind of attitude. But eventually they embraced it, and they now, I think, see the benefit of it, that that if other companies apply it, and people like you who talk about it, it's like free PR and free marketing, and you can't buy that, right? There's no way you could. So, that's the story.
Awesome.
We've got another question from the chat. Rob Hawk asks, as an audio black belt, is Dr. Olive's personal favorite headphone a secret? So what is your favorite headphone?
No, I mean, I don't know.
At liberty.
I don't know if I have a personal favorite. I'm totally agnostic.
It seems like your favorite headphone would be speakers.
Yeah, I listen to speakers more than headphones. I have Rebel Salons at home. And
he never misses an opportunity to flex that on those of us who don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and they're not even the most flat speakers, but they're pretty flat, and they have great wide dispersion. And I think speakers are still, for me, a better experience if I'm home. But yeah, I generally like, I like some competitors' headphones. I have a collection of them. I like some of Harman's headphones. I mean, I'm listening to these Endurance 2 runs, right? Endurance Run 2. they're called, and they're like $20, but they almost hit the Harman target. So I don't think you have to spend a lot of money to get good sound and headphones. But what you do get is usually more comfort,
Well,
lower
hopefully.
lower distortion. Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah.
So,
Unless
yeah,
you buy Abyss.
yeah. So I won't. I'll leave that open.
Okay.
What did you?
I like unlike the rest of them. I won't say my favorite is the HE1.
Oh, okay.
The
Interesting.
HE one is pretty good
Hot
though.
take.
To be
Okay.
honest, I've never heard the HE1, so I
Oh.
can't. Because you always have to line up. It's like by appointment only.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it's
Okay,
close-
the
it's
next
very
time
close
we
to
have
the
one
Harman
on
target.
hand, you should visit us and you can listen to it as much as you want.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, what did you say, Ortor?
I was just saying that. I mean, you've heard things close to it because just from looking at measurements, it measures suspiciously close to Harman.
Yeah.
Considering that it was, I mean, before that, and development was done before those papers were released. But like if you look at well, you can't. But if you talk to the people at Sennheiser about what curves they targeted for that headphone, and which studies they did leading to those conclusions, the results essentially confirm what you later went on to publish. So it's not really. It shouldn't come as a surprise that it measures close to what we now call the Harman target.
Critically
Here's-
with less ear gain, though.
Why does the HD 660 measure like that in that case?
Not a flagship headphone.
Yeah,
Oh,
but
yeah.
they went backwards with that one.
Compared
to-
might not have been the same team. I'm not sure who
Yeah.
actually designed that.
So was Axel Krell the guy who designed HE1?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. By the way, one of the best experiences I've had from going to Cam Jam was meeting Axel Krell.
Oh yeah.
I've met him twice, 2 shows in a row now, and he's not only a brilliant engineer, but he's a super nice guy.
Yeah, he's
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
Like
I love
very
Very fun to talk to.
very down to earth. Very. I could talk to him for hours.
Yeah.
yeah, he is a good chat.
He's a guy you want to go out and have beers with.
Not
Although
like
you
any of the
spend
rest
a lot
of us.
times. Oh,
And he was
Uh,
nice enough to sign my headphones.
Yeah,
I don't know if you can see
he's sending me a pair of his new ones that have this very low
Oh, yeah.
impedance. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
the open ear.
yeah, yeah.
Did you get to
Curious.
listen to that at the show at all, or?
No, I didn't, unfortunately, but
You need a quiet space for that.
yeah, and he's sending me a pair so I can listen to them. Yeah.
Fair. I wanted to get your take on the Mark Levinson 5909. I know it's obviously a Harman brand headphone, but just your thoughts in general on the outcome there.
Well, I mean, it's apparently selling really well. There may be a Mark II version coming out. I don't know if that's public, so where are those helicopters?
Yeah.
It is.
Do you? The reason I'm asking is it's a much higher priced headphone. Like it's around, I think, $1,000 or $900 or something like that.
Yeah.
And I guess what I always wonder with stuff like that is when they're developing products based on the Harman research, or they're trying to have reasonable, adherence. Do they consider things like this is a more expensive headphone, therefore we'll aim for class 3 because class 3 might be older and therefore can afford to buy the more expensive headphones? Or conversely, this headphone is cheaper or less expensive and we're targeting younger audiences, therefore we'll go for class 2 or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think their demographic is firmly, it's obviously an upscale demographic at $1,000 a pair. So it's probably in the 40 years to 50 years old kind of person, or someone who works in Silicon Valley and makes $500,000 or less. I mean, when you refer to an older person, there's this, probably you're talking about the 10K resonance that somehow managed to creep into production, but below 10K, it's fairly compliant with the Harman target.
Well, and also has filters to adjust for the different segments anyways. But
yeah. Exactly. So the bass, it only adjusts the bass filters though. So if I were to, redo that one or had a say in it, I would probably add some treble filters as well. But that headphone was also really driven by, Lexus, who is Mark Levinson. If you didn't know, it was is a branded, the only car that has branded Mark Levinson in it. So they had a desire to have a product that Lexus owners could afford to purchase without having to spend a lot of money on, a $20,000 amplifier or even a $5,000. Yeah. So it was a product aimed to sort of the entry level Mark Levinson product.
Cool. Any other questions from chat? I could keep asking, but
well, I have a question of my own, but also we do have one more from chat, which is, do people prefer different targets for different types of music? So the same individual, different target, different music.
Yeah, that's a good question. And in the early days, we had, this was a question that, usually the good questions, I'm being sarcastic, come from marketing. And they thought that that Beats headphones, people mostly listen to hip hop and like bass heavy music, and that for some reason the headphones were optimized for that music. So we included some hip hop in a test, and we didn't find that people preferred a bass heavy headphone for that music. In general, throughout my career, I've found that, I mean, the bass boost is sort of baked into the recording, and the whatever genre of music you have, it's baked into the mix. So I don't think when they master or mix these recordings, they have boomy speakers or a speaker that matches the genre. They monitor over, reasonably flat studio monitors. So yeah, I don't think you need a separate target for different genres of music.
I can add maybe something here, just a small addendum. So while there's an abundance of research showing that for different genres, the same people would not necessarily choose different targets, as you mentioned, we do see some correlation that people who prefer listening to a certain genre, as in people who exclusively listen to hip hop, might have a preference for, like, for example, more bass. As in, if I listen to hip hop, I would not necessarily prefer more bass because I don't listen to hip hop as much. But people who do listen exclusively to hip hop, or more so than others, or insert other genres, might have distinctly different preferences.
What's that
but
research
this again,
from?
Unpublished.
Okay.
But that would be
NDA violating.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that would not go against the notion that people have different preferences, which is something that is established. So this would that essentially.
Yeah, I don't know. It's when you look at studies not necessarily driven from improving audio performance, but driven from understanding the psychology and personality of people based on what music they listen to. I remember reading a study of a guy who, they went to a stoplight outside of a school, and when cars pulled up at the stoplight, they surveyed how many cars had males in them that had boomy stereo that were shaking the car, and like it was like 99% males and females maybe 1%. So, and in all these studies, they always find that it's related to this, one of the 5 personality traits, which is aggression or assertiveness. And young males like to show their dominance by cranking up the bass, and and listening to bass heavy music.
That tells us something about Blaine.
That tells us something about Griffin as well.
I'm so aggressive. You're so right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the amount of bass you listen to could be an early indicator of perhaps a serial murder or whatever.
So related to music, apart from Tracy Chapman's Fast Car, do you have any recommendations or album recommendations for the folks in the audience who might be, say they bought a new Harman tuned headphone to be able to sort of flex the muscles of their new purchase?
Yeah, I mean, when we do listening tests, we want programs that have the full bandwidth, so you can hear any kind of the full bandwidth balance, frequency balance. So if it's very band limited, you won't necessarily know how well it's balanced in the bass, and same with treble. And we choose them. We actually came up with an objective way where we'll listen to 12 different target curves or headphone curves and put different music through it, and we look at which music produces the most reliable and discriminating responses. And it tends to be very correlated with the large bandwidth spectral density. So that would be one way to guide you into how to choose your music. I think well recorded, which is more subjective, would be another criteria. If you're listening to heavy distorted, like heavy metal, that's very not balanced, that may skew you towards a non-flat, non-neutral headphone. So, the tracks you mentioned, Tracy Chapman, Jennifer Warren's classical, full band classical full orchestra stuff is good. Jazz with vocal and piano and bass and drums is good.
Stacey Kent.
Yeah, I mean, I personally like her a lot. Her stuff tends to be well recorded.
Yep.
But I don't know that we have any. It's not a typical. I mean, we have a lot of Diana Krall that gets onto our playlist. It's well recorded.
And she's a fellow Canadian.
Yeah.
So we have a question from Marcel in chat, which is, has Harman tested how preference change over time for a specific individual? For example, he struggles to believe that someone who preferred 15 dB of bass boost would like that in the long run.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think the data we have shows that older people, especially with more training, people with training or older people like less bass as they get older. It's on the order of a couple of dB. Part of that could be hearing loss. People will turn the bass down and turn the treble up to compensate for their hearing loss. I don't know how much of it is just personality change, but if you're trained, I think a lot of those differences go away because we have younger trained listeners who like the same amount of bass as I do. So training and hearing loss, I think, are factors.
That's fair.
But that would be an interesting study. I don't know of anyone who's really addressed that.
I have a question just for myself. We're all familiar with Constantine's presentation at CanJam, both the CanJams recently, about factors that influence the variation in headphone FR. One of the things that I've been thinking about, and that Constantine already does, is displaying headphone frequency response as a probability space, basically as a range of results bounded by, say, this is 90% of all results fall into this area. How do you feel about that as a visualization for frequency response? Because on the one hand, it's to some degree more accurate to the range of experience people have, but on the flip side, it means that comparing it to a line or even a tight window becomes more difficult.
Blaine, I'll see if I can pull this up. Do you have an image I can add to
Yes, I posted an image about this to the Discord at
Left one or right one,
11:58.
it doesn't matter.
Either, it's fine.
Okay, let's see if I can add that to the stream.
So
Sean see it.
I won't
Oh.
see it. Yeah.
I will send it to Sean.
Okay, this stream can now see it.
Oh, I see.
I think I can.
So how do you post it to me?
I was just going to put it in the chat for the Google Meet. Just
Oh,
click
okay.
the link.
I haven't.
And for those who may not have attended Oratory's talk at CanJam, it's basically to show that headphones, there's a range of different seatings. And for example, depending on the headphone, that range could be quite significant in the bass if there's a gap, for example. And so the question is, well, what's the correct, what one line is correct? And so the idea is showing a range gives a better picture of the overall performance of that product.
Yeah, I mean, I like this idea. I mean, this is Ratings does something similar. They'll measure a headphone several times and show the variation, and you can clearly see. It varies a lot in the bass and it varies a lot in the treble, and I think it gives a pretty good, indication of how it might vary on different people. Although it's only measured on one test fixture, so it doesn't really show the variation as a function of your head shape and size. So
something that we've thought about internally is having multiple variation plots, one for interpersonal variation, one for, shall we say, placement variation, both variations in seal and also variations in forward, back, up, down.
mhm.
So that people can see both how headphones are, how their consistency is across different ears, and also how, for a given owner of that headphone, how it might vary just from session to session.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting too. I measured, as I said, I measured a bunch of headphones on humans, and one of the headphones that had a lot of variation was the BCA Stealth, particularly with the seal. And this, I never put any names on the graphs, but people figured it out. And Dan Clark came back to me and said, well, why? He didn't believe it. And he said, if you move it this way and tilt it this way, and you can get a good seal. I said, well, I just told people to put it on and move it around until it was comfortable. And there was no specific instructions. So perhaps what you suggest, where you make these adjustments, you can find the exact position where you get a good seal, and that would be helpful for people as well.
And conversely, it would show headphones that are very sensitive to it.
Yeah.
Like
on the other hand, I have to say the Eon Noir, which is I didn't test a large sample of headphones. I think it was only 9, but out of all the closed back headphones, that one had the most consistent seal. And it's, for me, that's a great performance feature, I think. And if the new E3 has similar performance in terms of consistent seal, that would be a great selling feature. Dan said that it has a lot to do with the cups on the Eon Noir are much smaller. The space inside is much smaller, so there's less room for movement. So maybe that's a key factor.
Yeah.
I just have one more self-indulgent question. I'll have to stop here, otherwise the guys will lynch me. But one of the things that I've been thinking about testing is specifically using fixed leaks, like a coupler that has a fixed integrated leak, to show essentially the resilience of certain headphones to leaks. So for example, those with glasses, if you have thick framed plastic glasses, you will have a leak, period, because you cannot press those against your temples. Yeah. There will always be a gap. So I think do you think it would be interesting to see that data as well for headphones? Because some of them, e.g. the HG800 or a Hi-Fi Man, are a lot more resilient to it than others.
We do this in the industry, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, years ago, when AKG was still making headphones in Austria, I visited their labs, and they were they had some bizarre, all their test fixtures were, most of the ones were handmade. They were made out of brass, and they had different channels on the, you would put it on this flat plate, and they had different channels where they could simulate different levels of leaks. And that was something they were very much into testing. There was a guy very briefly had a website measuring headphones, and he was a British guy. I can't remember his name.
Brent Butterworth.
Who?
Yeah.
Brent Butterworth.
Do you mean Keith Howard?
Keith
Brent's
Howard.
not Brent's not
Oh, yeah.
British.
Yeah, no, Keith Howard. And
Headphonetestlab.co.uk.
Yeah.
Still up.
oh, still up? Is he
Yep.
still measuring headphones?
Occasionally, yeah.
Yeah.
Hasn't
So
added
he,
since 2022.
so he has a test where he does exactly that. He puts glasses on the test fixture and will show how it might perform if you wear glasses.
Actually, we've done some of that too, with measuring with an air gap. It's not specific to any given pair of glasses, but it would show cases where there's a particular leak, or if you have certain other designs where actually the bass increases.
If you want to do
rather
this
than
in a more
drawing out.
precise way, as in if you want to do this, build it as an actual like measurement setup with where you can get precision, as in repeatability, then doing with actual glasses is not as repeatable because you would place
Yeah.
it a different way of time, but you would just add controlled leakage with a leakage path.
Yeah.
There's adapters for couplers and also for dummy heads, similar to what Sean has described, having seen at AKG. So I've seen those fixtures as well. We use a similar one here.
Mhm.
So that's something that is still being done and delivers quite useful data, especially now with headphones that need to be designed for high leakage tolerance, like noise canceling headphones have this as a requirement. That's something that's still being done to a great extent.
Yeah, of course, there's a new category of products coming out, AR glasses, or glasses that have cameras built into them, and they're putting transducers in these glasses. So maybe sometime down the future, we'll have headphones built into our glasses, so we won't have to worry about this.
Well, that's a product we sell, yeah.
So now that we've sufficiently indulged Blaine's desire to get Dr. Olive's approval for the the revisions to the headphones.com data visualization plus, are there any?
What he thought.
That's fair.
I have another
fair.
question,
Yeah.
actually, and this one was from a community member, friend of the program, called Maya.
Maya
their-
TL. Shout outs.
Their question, shouts out to Maya. Their question was, what does Harman envision research into preference will be like for object-oriented systems in general? So whether it's like an Atmos soundbar or like AirPods Pro 2, where it, is doing object-based audio and binaural rendering. How, in your opinion or Harman's opinion, do you do preference research into that? Do you have any ideas on that, and how we as reviewers can best review those systems?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very timely question, because I'm just next week kicking off a project on improved spatial testing and training.
Oh,
Yeah, so there's definitely a need for doing better subjective and objective testing of immersive audio, and because there's so many systems now, and unfortunately Dolby is calling everything Atmos, whether it's on your phone, your laptop, or you go to a theater and hear like 100 speakers. So people are confused what it is. So if you actually tested it, you would find there's huge differences between listening to Atmos on your phone through the little speaker and going to a cinema. So I mean, one of the focuses is localization, right? If you listen to test tones or sounds that are supposed to be coming out of the left, center, right, overhead, front, rear, surrounds, or somewhere in between, you'll get a totally different answer if you listen to real sources versus a sound bar or a pair of headphones that's rendering that. So one of the first task will be to come up with a localization test where you could go into the Hyperion space with all these loudspeakers or a listening room and generate these test signals, and you have some way of pointing to where the sources are in space. And you can draw the azimuth, the elevation, and even the width of the source, or whether the source is split. And that would be one of the training aspects. And then it would include immersion, the sense of reverberance, because some of these renderings have add reverb to give you better externalization. So yeah, I have a whole year plan where we're going to develop a spatial training system to train people and measure their ability to describe object-based sound, and then out of that will come a way to actually test it. So there's a big need for this in cars, because we're starting to put immersive systems in cars, and being able to objectively measure where the sources are is one of the things. And then ultimately, when you have these systems that can generate all these signals, we want to be able to put a Mannequin or a 5128 or something, capture all these signals, and then use machine learning or AI or artificial intelligence to predict where these sources are using all the subjective data.
You hear that, Blaine?
Hear what?
Machine learning.
I'm not saying machine learning is always bad. My complaint about the use of machine learning in MDEX is that I think that MDEX doesn't need machine learning to work.
Okay, yeah, fair.
Yeah,
And
but
that
it looks
makes it
good
a
on
black.
the...
It makes it into more of a black box than I think
Yeah.
it should be. Like, Sean's stuff is not a black box. We know what the actual values are and the implicit relationship of causation that they imply. But that's less true for MDEX.
It looks good as a selling feature, though.
Yeah.
Machine learning. It's fun.
Yeah, if you put AI
Slap it on.
into your company's name, your stock price is just going to go up
That's-
automatically.
Yeah.
That's
So you're
the
saying
next
we should
part
get
of...
headphones.ai?
Well, no, that's the next part of the Harman target. It's like 2024 Harman target 5128 with AI.
Yeah.
Machine learning slapped
I mean,
on.
he did use some machine learning in the in one of the preference things, I think.
Yeah, I mean, if you're using multiple regression to predict scores based
There you
on
go.
preferences, that's technically machine learning. I use that whenever I'm talking to executives. I always point that out, that this research was supported by machine learning.
There you go.
And I get
This
a
working like that.
I know a guy who always describes machine learning as regressions in California.
me.
Oh no, this is someone I followed from my econ fanboy days, but it's a common joke that a lot of ML is just regressions in one form or another. Well, at least
I mean,
a lot of it works.
I worked on a project a couple of years ago where we took subjective evaluations of car audio, like 256 car audio systems, different brands of cars. They had listening test data on spectral balance, spatial fidelity, distortion, and dynamics. And I looked at all the data, and I could clearly see there was a target curve, that the ones that scored high tended to fit this curve. And but the problem with the data was it was highly correlated. So you could take the fidelity, the spectral balance, the spatial, and the dynamic, and they all tended to highly correlate, like 0.85, 0.9, which I had this question for Jacob, which I never asked, but people do these tests all in the same session where they have these scales, and if you do it that way, then the scores tend to be highly correlated. So they'll say, well, I really like this one, I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10, and then they give 9 out of 10 for all these other things. And it's problematic. So you have to do them independently, because there's this thing known as the halo effect, where if you really like something, all your ratings tend to follow. So anyways, it turned out that only one of these attributes, which was spectral balance, was necessary to predict the scores. I then worked with this team of AI researchers at Harman who just let loose with all this data. There was a lot of data, and they came up with this ability to predict the response, the scores, with even higher correlations in the high nines, mid nines. But it was a total black box to me. I didn't understand how it came up with these ratings, except that they could do it with using just spectral balance.
It's worthy of note that the magnitude FR is an ingredient in every single one of MDEX scores, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah. And he says that these other attributes are important, but we don't know the weightings, do we?
Yeah. Well, I think that's what MDEX tried to come up with their total quality score.
Mm-hmm.
We have a question from chat for you, Dr. Olive. The Great Divide says, what are your thoughts on open versus blocked ear canal mics at the ear entrance point when measuring headphones? That is, do you think that the blocked and versus open transfer function will stay the same for all headphones, or do you expect it to change from headphone to headphone? So that is to say, can we predict eardrum response from just the closed canal mic? And I know what Constantine is going to say, so shut up, Constantine. We all know what Constantine's going to say.
I mean, I think it may. Yeah, I have to think about it. So the response, on the blocked versus open canal change from headphone to headphone.
Well, there have been papers written on this exact question.
Yeah.
So the answer depends on the headphone.
Yeah,
it's about.
I would think so. Yeah, of course. So I guess that question's answered.
Yeah.
And what does Oratory think about this?
I mean, it's not so much what I think, it's what we observe, and what theory predicts would happen is if you have a system that is determined by, say, mass and stiffness, so it has a sort of mechanical impedance, and you load it with different impedances, then depending on its own mass and stiffness, it will behave differently. So if we have headphones that have a different acoustic output impedance, which we do, then loading them with different acoustic impedances will produce different results.
Yeah.
That's not something that might be as problematic if you only work with headphones that have similar acoustic impedances. So if you work with 5 headphones, which are all open back, have a lot of controlled leakage built in, and all have electrodynamic speakers of the same or similar mass, then you might not observe those differences. But if one of those headphones is a headphone with, let's say, a relatively stiff system, let's say a MEMS speaker, for example, then you certainly will observe those differences. So
yeah,
absolutely. If you phrase the experimental question right, as in if you use headphones that have a different acoustic output impedance, then you will observe different results. That's not really a question of whether you believe in whether or not it happens. It's a fact.
Well, the one question, and I will say that you can spin from this, is for the set of headphones that Sean is interested in testing, is this an effect that he is worried enough about to bother testing it?
Yeah, I mean, in the last year, our group has, we've acquired some new researchers, and one of them is an expert in COMSOL, right? He's a acoustics guy who's expert in modeling in COMSOL, actually very good at 3D printing ear canals. And the other guy came from Logitech, and he's designed headphones, all kinds of headphones, and he's an expert. He's done a lot of work comparing type 3.3 versus 4.3, measuring the characterizing them and modeling the headphone impedance, and then seeing how it would perform in type 4.3 versus 3.3. So he's able to predict in COMSOL how a response would vary depending on its impedance across different listeners who have different ear impedances. So, and from that you can come up with some rules about if you want to design a headphone that has the minimal interaction with human ears, it should have this impedance characteristic. And balanced armatures are probably a poor choice if you want to minimize these variations at low frequencies. So that's one of the reasons why you probably don't see many headphones with balanced armatures in the low range. They're typically used in a hybrid where it's a tweeter or a high frequency transducer, and they use a dynamic. It's not just because the dynamic has more output capability, but it's going to minimize these kinds of variations.
Higher compliance, yeah.
Yeah.
For,
So one of the study, I've had conversations with this guy recently where we may try to account for this when we do a large survey of people and look at what their preferences are depending on the acoustics of their ear canals and how it interacts with the headphones.
There is a, for those who are listening and might be interested in this, there is a paper written by Hammershoy and Moeller in 1995 called The Transfer Characteristics of Headphones Measured on Human Ears, and they address this exact concept. And they introduce a really kind of interesting way of measuring this, which they call PDR, which could be very interesting for headphone reviewers to potentially start measuring in the future.
Yeah, that's a good paper.
We have another question from the chat. Actually, two people asked the same question, so I guess it's in demand.
Just before that, we've taken up well more than 2 hours of Dr. Olive's time, so maybe like these should be the final questions. I know Blaine could ask for.
Let Sean decide when to cut it off.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right?
let's let Sean decide. He's the
Okay.
important one here.
Okay.
Yeah. But go ahead, Blaine.
That is to say, Sean, just let us know when you'd like to cut it.
Yeah.
So the question here, though, is two people asked separately, why does adding a minus 1.4 decibel 2500 hertz shelf filter to the flat in-room create a treble shelf that is brighter than the Harman 2015 target, when those were the values stated in the paper, factors that influence listener preferences for bass and treble levels in headphones? So the general finding that we've had when we've scraped the data ourselves and pixel peeped it is that it looks like it's about
A decibel.
Yeah, about a decibel difference between what was listed in the paper and what we find by scraping the figures from the paper.
Yeah, I have theories.
Do we
on
have
that.
any idea about why that is, or is that also like the small ear gain change one, something where it was a long time ago and I don't remember? Because that would be very reasonable.
So let me summarize what you said. So the target, the method of adjustments was what, 6.6 in the bass?
Yeah.
Yep.
And minus 1.4 in the treble.
Correct.
And is that
It disagrees with an image that is shown in the study.
Yeah, the plotted curve does not match the values that are posted.
Yes.
Is it the one I just posted in chat?
Oh, well, yes, but that's not the one from the original paper. I'll pull up the
Okay.
pertinent.
I posted about it recently in our Discord. I can find the images.
Yeah.
I may have to join this Discord.
Yes.
See,
yes,
we
do.
invite
That
you
is- that
to it
is the rule.
periodically.
Another
It's very frequent for us to invite you to that Discord.
Okay.
Listener, can you drop it in our Discord as well, and I'll pull it up.
Yeah, sure. I'm just getting.
Okay, so figure 13 disagrees with the
With.
subject.
Hold on. And that should be the filter values. And I've sent you the filter values that you used in the pilot study that you just did as well. So, but let me send that in our chat now. But yeah, so what we've seen, and this is kind of my theory, is that the figure 13 has about a decibel less treble than the filter value, which makes it a negative 2.4 decibel shelf, which would make it align exactly, I think, with the speaker target from earlier papers that you had done, where it was, I think you were comparing it to
It was the preferred bass and treble level for headphones and loudspeakers is the kind of paraphrase of the title.
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess my theory is that that curve was accidentally put where the 2015 curve was supposed to be in figure 13.
Yeah.
And I think the reason this is of special interest to people is because the common understanding of the 2018 target, which has historically been the most commonly used,
Mhm.
was that it was the 2015 target with a ear gain adjustment. So if we don't know what the parameters of the 2015 target are, we by extension don't know the exact parameters of the 2018 target.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I mean, I was unaware of that. So thanks for. I was telling my girlfriend before about this talk today, and I said I'm going to talk to a bunch of people who know my papers better than I do. I said I'm in for a rough 2 hours.
well, hopefully it wasn't that rough.
I mean, no, this has been fun. Yeah. So yeah, I'll have to go back and look at that. But do you think the 2018 is better than the 2015?
I think the rough consensus of the audiophile sphere would say that is the case. 2015 is rather scarcely used in our discourse.
Yeah, and if you look at the SenseLab paper published last October, I think the 2018 did better than the 2015.
Yeah, or if you look at like the results of your pilot study of our curve versus Sound Guys, because that is where the largest difference between the two curves is.
Yeah. So it's good that we're moving forward in the right direction at least. But yeah, I mean we published so many papers, I think 19 over the course of 10 years that it's hard to remember them all and keep track of them. And I'm sure errors have crept into the figures, which only people like you have found, because we don't. Yeah. Once we write them, we tend to forget about them.
Right. I mean, the assumption is that the filter values as listed on like the numbered bar graphs are the accurate values.
Yeah.
Because if you corroborate them with the rest of the graphs you post of numbers, based on demographics and age and gender and stuff like that.
I mean, the subjective data is the important stuff, and
right.
I tend to analyze all that data, and a lot of the measurements and things were done by my co-author. So which means I can blame them for the mistakes.
Nice. Love that.
On which note, we have a question from chat.
Yeah.
HD6XX asks, what was the reasoning behind turning the mannequin from 0 to 30 degree at each angle of incidence in the Harman reference room? I think he's talking about the older.
Yeah. So I think the idea was to do some spatial averaging so that if you have any kind of strong acoustic constructive or destructive interference, that would minimize it. It would also make the curve maybe a little smoother than if you just measured a single diffuse HRTF. I guess you wouldn't call it diffuse HRTF, but a single HRTF. So
yeah,
that was Todd's idea, and that was I think the motivation behind it. And the most recent results I showed, I had so many speakers to measure, because Todd, he just measured left and right. I measured 19, had to do each one independently with 3 mannequins. I didn't bother to do spatial averages, but if you're measuring a lot of speakers, I guess in a sense, there's some kind of spatial average built into that.
There was a second follow-on from HT6XX, which I think is the sort of interesting question. Are there any plans to look into preference for baseline HRTF methods? So if there's a preferential difference between, I'm guessing, the most preferred curve derived via DF, the most preferred curve derived via a frontal loudspeaker, etc.
Yeah. I mean, there were differences in this data between measuring, 3 or 4 front speakers versus just the surrounds versus the overheads. And the front ones obviously have a lot more energy at 3K, between 3 and 6K. So we haven't done a comparison of those two, but given what I'm hearing from you, you're asking for less 3K. So, and it certainly that wouldn't be a diffuse field. That would be a very frontal weighted HRTF. So I don't know. It's possible we could do it. It wouldn't take too much work, but my guess is that the diffuse field is probably closer to what people might prefer than the frontal field.
I'm gonna
And
just clip that and put that everywhere.
and certainly, I mean, if the only difference is in a very narrow band, you could certainly just have an adjustment in your controls.
There are also methods for estimating the differences that you would get based off of a combination of the free fields data and the diffuse field data.
Yeah.
It shows pretty good agreement with the results that you got with the 518 and your the method by Chris Struck.
I mean, this idea of, I think there's a paper by Hammershoy and Moeller back in the early 90s where they talked about, they were one of the first people to measure HRTFs, and they talked about this notion of combining, because at that time the diffuse field was the standard, and they said, and I think even Floyd Toole wrote a paper in the early 80s talking about, well, maybe diffuse field's not the optimal one, and he was working with Edgar Shaw at the time, who was famous for the external ear transformations, and he suggested maybe it's some combination of frontal and diffuse, and then Mahler actually showed some curves where you could take the HRTFs and derive different weighted measurements. So yeah, the idea's been around for many years. Just that predates what Christopher did.
Yeah, I believe that the paper you're referring to is design criteria for headphones.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, the interesting thing about Chris's thing, I thought, was that it was an elegant way to combine the RT60 as a function of frequency, speaker directivity, and the HRTFs to basically synthesize the mixed sound field.
Yeah. It's good work.
Any other questions, or have we exhausted the nerd chat? Crinacle's about to fall asleep.
Crinacle is about to fall asleep.
Well, it is 4 a.m. from my side, but at the same time, that's racist. Just because I have small eyes.
Oh, yeah. All right,
You're literally nodding off with your head.
Resolve is canceled. I get
All right.
I get the channel now.
Congratulations, Blaine.
We're all doomed.
Okay, so let's see. Was there one more in the stack of questions that?
Oh, I mean, I have a question. I have a question that's in the stack.
Yeah, shoot.
Like obviously we have a good amount of clarity on it based on the contents of the talk and the slides, but just for pure clarification's sake, the circle of confusion has been a drum that you and your friend Floyd Toole have been beating for a long time, and now with the move to diffuse field as your chosen baseline on which to make adjustments, at least preliminarily. Do you think DF is still equally kind of useful for accomplishing the same goals as your semi-reflective field measurement would have been?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we show that it very strongly correlates, or they almost line on top of one another.
Yeah.
In that given room with those given speakers, I guess there remains this question. Well, people will ask, well, what about my control room, or what about a typical studio control room where different speakers are used? So perhaps that needs to be addressed, but I think it's fair to say if you put 19 speakers in any room, it's going to look not too unlike a diffuse field response.
It's worthy of note that you can synthesize like within, I think, about a plus minus 1 dB error, a diffuse
Yeah.
field in an anechoic chamber with just
Yeah.
8 speakers.
Exactly, and that's what me Killian at Automotive used to do. He used to, he has a target curve for his Automotive headphones, and it was all based on measurements as you described, using rotating the mannequin or having speakers around the mannequin in an anechoic chamber. Of course, Mead and I disagreed on where the bass level should be set, but
It seems like you've won that argument in the long run, given that Edamata still has a bass boost.
yeah, it's fun. Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of respect for him. He's done a lot for the industry, but we always disagreed about that. And he was using a model based on Consumer Reports to predict scores on headphones. Years ago, he came to Harman and he gave me some recordings that had different equalizations. He gave me these headphones and he said, I want you to tell me which equalization you prefer. And I suspected I preferred the one with bass boost, but he never did tell me the results of the, but I gave a talk at an AES in Chicago, at which he attended, and some of his younger engineers told me secretly that, we're so happy you say they should have a bass boost. We're still working on me to add more bass to the headphones. So I don't know if they've done that.
I think they kind of did with the Evo.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, everything since the XR started.
Yeah,
being
the
a
XRs
label.
are the
Yeah. So I used his headphones when I was at the National Research Council for doing binaural reproduction. So in the case of binaural, of course, you don't want a 6 dB bass boost. So they work quite well. And at the time, they were the best option you could purchase, I think.
There is a question in the chat about, well, it's asking when the next paper might be published, but I suppose to expand on that a bit, I was wondering what's sort of the next step for you now that you sort of done the preliminary pilot stuff. What's next?
Well, I mean, I think it's going in and fine tuning it. Taking the Harman Beta 2004 and fine tuning it, doing some method of adjustments, looking, and then doing a large study where we test it with many people.
Wait, I do have a further question on that. So with the method of adjustment that you say you would want to do in the future, is it just for over ears, or are you going to explore in ears as well? Or is it like one or the other?
I don't know. I mean, there's no reason why we couldn't do it with both. I mean, one of the things I think we agree on is that, in the talk at CamJam, I showed all these measurements of in-ears done on both couplers, and when you measure in-ears on the 5128, the 4 dB bass mystery between in-ears and around ears, I think is solved. There's more bass when you measure it on a 711, which disappears, and so I'm getting to the point where maybe the target curves for over ears and in ears is starting to converge, and the question is, can you use the same target? Sound guys have already decided that you can use the same target for both. I think headphone, you guys probably are not certain about that because you think the interaction with an over ear with the pinna is missing in an in-ear and you need to make some adjustment.
Well, to be clear, we
fair?
actually do use the same target for both because we're using the same preference bounds for both.
There's
But
basically an internal debate about
Yeah.
what the appropriate HRTF shape is for in-ears because of the lack of the interaction with the pinna.
That's right.
Mhm.
And
Although these are very small changes.
Yeah, and as
We
far
do
as
agree about low frequency stuff.
the in-ear versus over-ear thing, if it does, merit having a different preference bounds for over-ears, for in-ears, then we would update the in-ear, higher, whatever, class 1, 2, 3 to sort of reflect that as well. But
Yeah.
as of right now, we didn't know because nothing was done yet to show that on the 5 and 2/8, so we were kind of waiting for that.
I mean, if it turns out that the same targets work, I guess in theory you could do these large studies using a over-ear headphone and assume you get the same results with the in-ear.
That's my
So-
assumption. Yeah.
Yes, I
But
would
we
agree.
need a
as well.
confirmation for that, right?
Yeah, I mean,
And
thanks for bringing it up because that's something I might do right away because it'd be a lot easier to do studies with over-ear open back headphone than using an in-ear where you have to check for seal and consistency and all that stuff.
and it might be,
Doing a test of that would be an excellent paper that you could put out that we could then reference off of whenever people
Yes.
yell at us.
yes.
Yeah.
So the other thing
Well,
with that,
my job in life is to make your job easier. That's why.
That's why we give you wine.
Yeah. Well, I received a bottle of wine for giving the talk at Cam Jam, but I haven't received anything for doing this. Was it two? Oh God.
Three
we,
hours.
we'll make sure to remedy that.
Yes, that will be sorted out.
I'm just kidding.
No, we should. We
Wait,
should
so-
all have a competition to see who can produce the bottle of wine
Singaporean
that
wine is
Dr.
next,
Olive
right?
is going to prefer.
Mm.
I would be into that. I think
I
that
will
would be a
take that
fun
challenge.
project.
Well, Blaine doesn't
Okay.
like any wine, so
I don't like any wine, but I know some. What is it? Owanophiles?
oh, okay.
Enophiles, aren't they?
Enophiles, yeah.
Yeah. So what do you like, Blaine, instead of wine? What's your?
I don't drink. I'm
I
a
know, but-
sober man.
Are you? Do you have like any proclivities that substitute for?
Vice. A
What?
vice.
Well,
Like for
to-
mind altering substances, no.
to be
No.
clear though, he did try wine. It's that he really doesn't like it, and the
Yeah,
look
I
on his
really-
face after trying it was very much. I wish I'd filmed it.
Yeah. So,
Wow.
no, in terms of luxurious indulgence, for me, it's expensive cheese.
Oh,
Oh,
You
yeah.
have opinions on pizza. Yeah.
Well, I have opinions on pizza, but in terms of like my respectable opinions, I have a lot of opinions on imported cheese,
Hmm.
and
Wow.
also intense disdain for anyone who does not use Pecorino Romano as a substitute for Parmesan. Parmesan is just linearly inferior.
Well, you know,
Blaine is gonna talk
wine,
to you.
wine goes really well with cheese. So
I've been told that, but it's never worked for me.
I'm still on a mission to figure out something that he's going to tolerate.
Okay, so someone else in this call, I just want to call him out, just immediately DM'd me to complain about that take.
About the Pecorino versus Parm take.
Yes.
Yeah, I also kind of disagree, but
They're different. They can form similar functions though. They can.
We can fight. We can fight about this.
that's the next preference research that gets done.
So you
Which
should
cheese
see,
scores better.
Scott gets it. Scott's on my team. Okay. But yeah, no, that's about it. That's about as indulgent as I get.
hmm well, it's good. It can probably save you a lot of money, and
Well, that's how I have all the money to afford all the hats that I find in dumpsters.
yeah.
If you find them in dumpsters, aren't they free?
Plane tickets
because
are.
you have to bribe the people who let you into the fucking into the trash area for universities.
The first hats we got was we had this guy, researcher Marshall Buck, who found in Arizona some fire sale on a I think it was a Kemar head, but it had no torso. So he went down to the LA clothing district and had the measurements of Kemar and found a clothing mannequin that got sort of glued onto the head. So
That's not crazy.
How is
No.
it that at every level of this industry we are all exactly as threadbare?
Well,
Well,
I
actually,
feel
that
really
kinda,
embarrassed
it
about
does
don't
kind of make
stuff.
sense.
I
You
don't
know?
think if you want to make money, you go into audio. It's not a lucrative business.
As was shown in a number of different studies, sound quality is only one of the factors in terms of what people actually what causes them to choose a headphone, and
But
it
fair,
doesn't.
yeah.
It's not meaningfully more than many of the a number of the other factors, right? So like how effective the marketing is, for example, and all the Beats stuff that would have been done before when it comes to actually selling headphones. So it does make a certain amount of sense that if you care a lot about selling headphones, that you would also heavily focus on those other things.
Yeah.
And sound quality is just one of them,
That was a paper given by I think Bang and Olson, right, at the 2016 headphone conference. Was it?
I'm not sure where I'm basing this off of a thing that Blaine pulled, so I don't know where that's.
Yeah, University of Aalborg. I think
Yeah.
they looked at things that motivated people, and sound quality was like number 3 or 4 on the list.
Yeah.
It's very depressing.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing. All right, so I get why we all intuitively say that. I actually disagree because I think that a lot of what people prefer with headphones makes a lot of sense, right? Like, what people like with headphones, if I'm remembering the Aalborg study correctly, is basically ergonomics and looks, and that makes sense because they're clothing, right? Like, you wouldn't pick your shirt in a blind test.
This is the fat end of the wedge take, and I completely agree.
Yeah,
if you think about it long enough, it's like this is perfectly reasonable to want in headphones.
It's just what that means is that it's incipient upon those of us who make or sell good sounding headphones to also make them a good experience in other respects, which is something that audiophile companies suck at.
Yep.
No.
What?
No?
What do you mean no?
I'm just joking. But yeah, I mean, comfort is definitely something we have to
woke up.
Get into. It's just that I think the biggest problem with audiophile companies is that we go so much for sound first that literally everything else just gets thrown out the window. But it's fine, right? It's fine for our market where people just.
Okay, I'm just gonna say, what's the best-selling high-end headphone of all? Like high-end? It's probably the HG800, right?
Probably,
What's one of the most ergonomic high-end headphones of all time?
Yeah. So that's what headphones. And because
IEMs aren't real.
The reasons why is because like the HD100 is so deep, right? It's so deep and wide to the point where nothing actually touches your ears, and of course the fact that it's just so lightweight, and but I think all of that just is kind of I mean, in certain ways it's just Sennheiser being Sennheiser. They decided to do two things at once and they succeeded at both, right? But with IEMs, there's a different topic altogether. I think the most comfortable one is like the Profile 8, the in-ear Profile 8, which has been copied by the KZ ZS3 and ZS4, and inspired the Razer Mores, which has been also very comfortable. But a lot of people still feel like it's really uncomfortable for some reason. I say some reason. We know why, because everyone has different ears, and some people just have that anti-helix poke that for some reason, right? Yeah, so it's hard to design a comfortable earphone. And you could say like, oh, we could do it like bullet style, like automotive style, but we all know how that turns out, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to use different ears.
So in our company, we've been working on this app that takes a picture of your ear, and then it recommends different styles of headphones based on how it might fit your ear or be comfortable.
That's brilliant.
That's awesome.
This is something I've been wanting to be made for a long time.
Can we clip this? Because that's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how well it works, but and I don't know if it's out yet. But so I think there's also some data that shows that this is why some people prefer a concha type phone, like an Apple. What are they called? The ones without the tips. Just sit in your ear.
Earbuds.
Earbud, yeah.
Intraconcha, earbud.
Yeah,
some people call them that, flatheads.
Some people like the dangle ones with the tip on it, like the AirPod Pro 2. And then some people the big problematic ones are the ones that go inside your concha, like a lot of the TWS. And the AKG 5005 was an example that thing would not fit anyone unless you bought foam. What are they called? The foam tips. Like a normal silicone tip would not, because the headphone was so large. So anyways, I think the app is mostly focused on in-ear type headphones, but and then there's the other phone now where the open ear phone, where there's nothing that goes in your ear. It's Bose has one that just came out. It clips onto
Bose Ultra or something.
Clips onto your it clips onto your earlobe.
The air conduction things, yeah.
And then we have one called that has a hook and just sits in your concha. And the challenge with all these headphones is to get decent bass.
Of course.
But anyway, so the app it recommends which type of headphone would suit you best.
The issue that I typically have is with in-ears is largely to do with the sound quality issues when, even if an IM is comfortable, it is sitting further out of the canal than might be optimal for the length mode or the air volume, which is a very difficult thing to control for across, or to design for across, if you think about, how ear canals vary.
Just do it like Sennheiser, parallel resonator. I know it didn't work that well. The i800 had that. They put a parallel Helmholtz resonator to try to.
A lot of earphones have that. Yeah.
Did they do that on the 200 and 600 as well? But that's a good example, because those ones do fit very differently from a lot of other ones. They actually fit way more snug, if that makes sense, in the ear canal. So you can avoid length mode issues.
So people in the chat are saying free Dr. Olive. We have that for 3 hours.
Do I look like I'm exhausted?
No, a little bit.
No. Okay.
So, do we have any final questions before we release him and also ourselves?
I'm sure we could keep going for a long time. Yeah,
okay, that's why I said
I have
high priority questions.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I mean, I have one. I'm looking for the slide to pair with it.
God, you're such a nerd emoji.
Well,
people in the chat are now saying free Crin and free us.
All right,
I just have to point out.
I'll make it quick. I'll try to describe it.
When you get called a nerd by Blaine,
slide. There's a slide where you show the difference between all of these simulated ear canals with simulated measurements of the momentum IEM versus the 4620. Yeah. And you see, it's mostly flat through most of the range, and then right around 5K, they're just a big discontinuity happens. And I mean, obviously, we can.
I'm trying to find it.
We shouldn't assume anything. What would you say we should take away from that slide?
Do you know which slide it is?
It's very close to the end.
It's near the end, yeah.
I think
it's like 102.
Yeah, I mean,
if this is correct.
There's some.
Yes, that's correct.
There was a paper presented at New York AES where Samsung also did a paper on this. They showed.
Yeah, Bezzola, I think.
Bezzola, yeah. Andrew, not Andrew.
And Andre.
Andre, sorry. Yeah, Andre. And they showed similar kinds of variations with ear canals. And they used the exact same database that we use. Except they did it on a type 3.3 Akimar. They didn't have a 5128. So the other difference between that paper and our paper is we actually printed 3D printed ear canals, so we could actually compare ComSol output with the physical measurements. But I mean, I think the takeaway is that people's ear canals vary in length and diameter, shape, and these are the kinds of differences you'll see. Do you have the graphic up?
I do.
Yeah. So I can't see it, but
you want to zoom in on the bottom right of.
I have it on
my page 102.
I have it on my PowerPoint. Yeah, so you can see there's plus or minus 5 dB differences you know, at almost plus or minus 5 dB differences from up to 10K, and then beyond 10K, they just they explode.
Yeah.
So the question, I guess, is are they important? Are these differences important? And you can see that the resonances shift a little bit in frequency as well as in gain.
Yeah, as well as in like sharpness, in
Yeah.
like quality,
Yeah.
which I think is kind of what's happening with Andrew with his complaint about.
Well, I mean, my complaint is that it's a more substantial issue when it's wrong, because than, for example, variation with positioning for over-ear headphones, unless it's very wrong, obviously, because some of these are fairly. I mean, they present subjectively as peaks, like substantial peaks if it's wrong.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I did an experiment where I simulated these curves. I took a B&K, I took a headphone equalized to the Harman target, and then I modified it with these variations or the differences between what we see in this graph, and then people could compare them. Now, on top of that, they're listening to their own ear canals, so I wasn't accounting for that.
Sure.
But these things are certainly audible. And
but I think your point was that this doesn't necessarily mean that preference overall, especially over a larger sample size, is going to change that much.
Yeah, that's the one thing. Because to do that experiment, you would actually have to know what the person's what the sound pressure is. And we have we did some preliminary experiments where we tried to estimate it, and the differences. It wasn't clear that compensating for them led to a huge improvement. Now, I think when you look at sound pressure at the eardrum for an open canal where you have individual contributions from the head and the concha and the pinna and the ear canal, the differences get much larger, and compensating for those might lead to more audible and beneficial improvements.
Sure.
But so yeah, one of the slides before that, we show a plot of all the ear canals that we printed. And I think if we can take different ear canals and attach them to the different heads that we printed, then we can actually see how much the ear canal, we could substitute the ear canals with the same head and see how much the open ear HRTFs vary as a function of the ear canal. Or you could put on different pinna, and sort of like your Mr. Potato Head Mannequin, where you can change heads, you can change ear pinnas, you can change ear canals, and
I feel like I could see Blaine salivating right now.
Yeah, you're living
Well,
the dream, Dr. Olive.
We've always wanted. I mean, this is the nice thing about the 5128 and its mechanism there. We've always wanted to figure out, okay, can we substitute an ear for a different ear just to see whether they respond, like a pinna? But it also makes sense to try this out with different canals as well.
Yeah, I mean, B&K offered to print me some different ear canals. I don't know if they have a database of ears that they can print, but the other fascinating thing I mentioned was this University of Michigan that has a database. They've measured heads, they've measured pinnas, and they've measured more recently ear canals, and they have a parametric model where they can, they looked at all the variations and they can define them as principal components. So they have online this very cool thing where you can change the principal components and see in real time how the head changes and how the ears change, and now even how the ear canal changes. So that gives you the possibility of changing all these parameters, and you could, print them and actually study them.
You could model based on demographic data for, let's say, audiophiles, large head and long ear canals, big ears.
Yeah. Inflated heads, yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Mostly
Typically
empty.
male.
Mhm.
So, I mean, the next thing to do would be to somehow have a COMSOL model tied into that, so
Yeah.
you could put on a pair of headphones and hear those differences. That would be cool.
Yeah.
That'd be very cool.
All right. I think we've sort of exhausted all the questions.
Or the participants.
Yeah, and the participants. Certainly the participants. Unless there's anything else from Crinacle and or Constantine.
Do I want to? Do I want to extend the discussion by another half an hour?
Do it.
No.
Yeah.
No, I think it's just more the confirmation of do you want, or are you going to try and do the parity between in ears and over ears for
That's a good question.
the DF tilt, the method of adjustment, so that just to confirm that we can use the same target curve for both in ears and over ears, because right now there's a lot of assuming going on, and I'm still feel like, okay, are we going to confirm it or not really?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good thing to confirm.
So
Yeah.
so probably like maybe 30 or so participants where they have to use both an over-ear headphone and an in-ear headphone and adjust accordingly, but it's like 2 separate tests for one participant.
Oh
Yeah,
wow! We're designing his experiment for him. Are we going to pay for it too?
Yeah, that's a
With wine.
lot of that's a lot of wine.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, it would be nice to have one target curve if we can show that it's necessary. I mean, sound guys have already figured it out, but it
It's
would be
pretty
nice.
good. I was listening
But
to it the other day.
sound guys is an assumption. It's still
Yes.
an
Yeah.
assumption.
Oh,
Yeah.
of course.
Yeah.
I mean, we've been doing sound guys research for them
Yeah.
between us and
In Sense Lab.
Sense Lab. And
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure within a week, sound guys are going to watch this video and send out a press release that Harman has independently confirmed their target is.
And shout outs to sound guys, just saying. In case they
Yeah,
get
no.
mad.
No, they've
Yeah. Sound
They're
Guys
doing
is the real winner here.
yeah.
Oh, I was listening to it. Even just last night I was EQing IEMs to it. It's pretty good.
It's a good
Mhm.
target.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I think they have some smart people there based on some of the things they've written and what I've, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is, it's amazing how, again, the contrast between the people reviewing headphones, we're talking about a select group here versus, people that review headphones and, loudspeakers, 20 years ago. We're seeing a lot more science and measurements being introduced to product review than I ever would have imagined.
Although to
Well,
be
it's largely
fair,
thanks to your work.
Yeah.
well, that's true.
Well, it's been, 30 years. Why did it take so long? I mean, headphones, people figured it out quickly, but apart from Audio Science Review and Aaron, what's his last name?
Artisan.
Aaron's audio recorder.
Eric, where else can you find measurements of loudspeakers?
I think that
loudspeakers is hard.
Soundstage has recently started doing some sort of CEA 2034.
Oh.
Like I've seen a couple of measurements that were spinoramas from them.
Well, they've been using the National Research Council where I used to work. That you can rent the chamber, but I just read a review of a new Bowers and Wilkins speaker, and there were no measurements attached to it. So,
To be fair, if you were going to review a Bowers and Wilkins speaker and you wanted it to sell, you probably wouldn't want to measure it.
yeah, there was a whole podcast on Audio Unleashed about that. That this Bowers and Wilkins speakers often don't sound like they measure.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Audio Unleashed is Brent's podcast, right?
Yeah, Brent and
I can't
his
remember the other
colleague,
guy's name.
Dennis Berger.
Yes.
They
I think
also,
part of it, there's just a lot of more podcasts now, so we all have to have something to distinct ourselves.
By the way,
they're-
also I have to just echo what somebody said in chat. Shout out to Aaron's Audio Corner. Those are some of the best speaker reviews on the internet.
Highly recommend.
Yeah, I totally
Yes.
agree. Yeah. Yep. And he does it he doesn't make any money doing it, which is amazing.
Yeah. So we have confirmation that the next bit of work is going to be to synthesize, see if it makes sense to have the same target for in-ears versus over-ears, because it makes the rest of the entire project a lot easier.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I
And
guess how do you test that exactly? Like seeing that the results are similarly preferred between the two, or like literally testing them against each other?
Well, I mean, you could see whether the method of adjustment produces the same results.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And then you could do some comparative preference testing between different targets or different headphones, and see if you get the same preferences, rank order.
Makes sense.
That's someone's calling.
We should probably, on that note, adjourn this and let Sean get to his call. So I want to thank.
It's someone calling me to help me get out of this.
Or they're telling you to
Yeah.
not give away
Yeah.
Harman secrets.
It's like
Yeah.
it's like when you're on a blind date and you say, if it doesn't go well, call me. or
Yeah,
something.
exactly.
Joel was joking that we're never going to get to talk to you again because after all the stuff you've leaked from Harman, they're not going to let you do any more interviews.
Well, that's a possibility.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Hopefully not.
Please no.
Yeah, we know nothing. The chat heard nothing. All right.
Mhm.
Yeah. No, we didn't learn anything from this.
Yeah, and on that terrible disappointment, it is time to end. So I want to give a big thanks to all the participants, Crinacle, Oratory, Blaine, Griffin, Joel, and a massive shout out and thank you to Dr. Olive for doing this. Thanks for your time, for basically answering all of our endless amounts of questions, and once again, all the amazing work that you do, moving this industry in the right direction.
Well, thank you very much. My pleasure.
Awesome. Alrighty, guys. And on that note, we will see you guys in the next live stream or video or whatever else we do.
Yeah.
All right.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Hey everyone.
Not Crinacle.
All right. And I'm going to end this now.